Chapter 949. Tyrant was so terrified that Duque only realized it when his face was less than 10 centimeters away from her. Like a startled rabbit, he subconsciously shrank back. Duque did not let Tyrant go. He pressed forward. Thump thump thump. Tyrant took 3 steps back. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Duque pressed forward 3 steps. Finally, Duque even did a standard wall slam. He pressed his left hand against the wall and placed his right hand on his waist, using his aura to suppress Tyrant, who was already leaning against the wall. One person. One elf. Their faces were so close that they could clearly feel each other's breathing. Tyrant was a little embarrassed. Duke Marcus, you're threatening the high priest of the moon goddess. Duque said shamelessly. Tyrant Whisperwind, I'll tell you right now that wizards don't believe in gods. Are you trying to betray Azeroth? Don't flatter me. Your words are very good, but they can only fool the rough people in the tribe. It's useless against me. You refuse to tell me where the 100,000 elites of the Night Elves are from the start. Do you really think the scouts of the Alliance are all blind? After the 3 races formed an alliance, Night Elves used the excuse of evacuating civilians to evacuate most of the elves from Mount Hyjal. But only the most elite Night Elves have been guarding the sacred mountain. Unless they're special craftsmen, civilians are not allowed to go up the mountain. Tyrant pursed her lips and did not say a word. She stared into Duque's eyes, as if trying to see what other cards this human commander from the other side of the endless sea had. Duque did not care. He continued, let me guess. The Night Elves were originally prepared to follow the ancient oath from 9,000 years ago. They were prepared to sacrifice their entire race to protect the World Tree. However, the Beastman's performance in Grey Valley, as well as the alliance between the 3 factions, gave you new hope. How good would it be if you could use the tribe, your mortal enemy, to protect the World Tree and allow the Night Elves to continue reproducing? It would be even better if the tribe died with the Burning Legion. Tyrant swayed slightly. Even if she hid it very well, it was a pity that she couldn't hide it from Duque, whose body was almost touching hers. How do we do that? The Horde was not stupid. If they suffered too much, they would naturally retreat. After all, the orcs were not native to Azeroth. The only conclusion is that the Night Elves can do what they did to the Burning Legion in the ancient war 10,000 years ago. This time, Tyrant could no longer control herself. Her red lips opened and closed like a fish that had been dragged onto the shore. Don't talk nonsense without evidence. At this moment, Duque really wanted to say, do you really think I don't know about the super explosion of Mount Hyjal in the original history? It directly blew up Mount Hyjal to the point where not even a blade of grass could grow for 10 years. It was just that Duque had never thought that the Night Elves, who were originally very conservative and abiding by their oaths, and had made great sacrifices for the greater good in history, would actually play such tricks. Where did it go wrong? Or was there a huge deviation in history? Duque finally gave his answer after much thought. I also know that the reappearance of the High Elves has put a lot of pressure on you, right? But you had no choice but to accept the High Elves entering Mount Hyjal in order to save the world. In the historical Battle of Mount Hyjal, there were no High Elves or Blood Elves. Jaina's Theramore soldiers would definitely not have any conflicts with the Night Elves. 8,000 years ago, the Night Elves exiled the High Elves as blasphemers. Who would have thought that Duque would bring Queen Sylvanas' Blood Elf Rangers over this time? This was clearly a slap to the face. When Duque said this, Tyrant's eyes were already glistening with tears. However, Duque continued to use his magnetic voice, as if he was speaking to Tyrant, but was actually trying to persuade her. I think that perhaps our destruction of nature's buildings and cannons, as well as the Horde's incessant cutting of trees, have provoked your druids. This was another contradiction that could not be resolved. To put it bluntly, the Night Elves were idealistic, while the dwarves and gnomes were materialistic. On one side, they advocated for Greenpeace, while on the other, they engaged in highly polluting industries. It would be a miracle if the druids were happy with the dwarves' cannons. At this time, Duque's words had already caused Tyrande to tremble uncontrollably. Duque made the final blow to Tyrande. The one who put so much pressure on you and advocated for getting rid of those untrustworthy blasphemers and scenarious murderer was Fandral Staghelm, wasn't it? This sentence was definitely a fatal blow. Tyrande's mouth twitched for a long time before she finally broke down and said, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I've never thought of harming an ally. I really didn't think." Tyrande, who had supported the Night Elves for 10,000 years with her head and shoulders lowered, looked no different from a weak human girl at this moment. The only difference was that even though tears were already welling up in her eyes, she still did not cry. "But when I think about the huge sacrifices we Night Elves are about to make. We have a cruel new neighbor and an alliance that has accepted our exiles watching from the sidelines. I can't calm down." Tyrande suddenly straightened her back, puffing out her chest and sucking in her stomach. From her bones, every movement she made exuded an awe-inspiring righteousness. Duque couldn't help but loosen his grip on the wall and take half a step back. "All right, Your Excellency Duke Marcus, I'll answer your questions one by one. Your conjecture is only half right. But the explosion plan you mentioned does indeed exist. In the ancient war, the powerful guardian dragons were unable to stop the invasion of the Burning Legion. Why should we believe that you mere mortals can stop the footsteps of the demons? Even if the demons have been weakened by magic formations. Ugh, the power of the explosion is directly proportional to the number of souls sacrificed by the Night Elves. 100,000 elites were prepared to sacrifice themselves to protect this beautiful world. But how could we bear to see our remaining clansmen being bullied by cruel tribes after their sacrifice? How could we bear to see our beautiful forests being destroyed by wanton felling of trees? So dare I ask, isn't it too much to plan for the worst-case scenario? Furthermore, I haven't agreed to carry out Fandral Staghelm's plan." At this moment, Duque suddenly understood the true intentions of the Night Elves. They were kinder than he had imagined. Chapter 950. Archdruid Fandral Staghelm was an ancient night elf with a reputation that spread far and wide. He was already a prominent member of the Cenarian Circle when he was young. Staghelm's tall stature and fiery temper made him a difficult and powerful druid in the eyes of the world. He often talked back to his master because of that, but Malfurion named him as one of the most talented students among all of his students. Similarly, Fandral was a representative of the radical faction in the Cenarian Circle. Under Duque's probing interrogation, Tyrande had no choice but to confess. This time, the power of the radical faction had affected the strategy that Tyrande and Malfurion had decided on. Although Tyrande had used a lot of modifiers and changed parts of the content to cover up Fandral Staghelm's radical words, her efforts did not escape the detection of the system elf. The incredibly arrogant system elf even had a function similar to a lie detector. Based on Tyrande's heartbeat, speech speed, tone of voice, dilation of pupils and other objective data, as well as the slang of the High Elves' Salis language, it was able to make a reverse inference. After all, as a branch of the Darnassus language of the Night Elves, Salis and many things were similar to Darnassus. Of course, in the eyes of the proud High Elves and Blood Elves, mixing Salis and Darnassus together was an abnormally foolish and impudent move. Tyrande would never have dreamed that a young man like Duque, who looked to be in his 20s, would actually understand Darnassus and be proficient in the illusions within it. Just like that, no matter how Tyrande tried to hide it, the system elf was able to reproduce Fandral's original words. "Those incompetent beast men only know how to kill our brethren and burn our forests." The first wave of attacks from the enemy caused them to lose the camp that they had cut down tens of thousands of century-old trees to build. I really don't understand why Tyrande Whisperwind would choose to trust those cruel green-skinned beasts. Is it because she believes in a so-called prophet who has been resurrected? O God of nature, we can't even be sure if Medivh is still serving the Burning Legion. What we can be sure of is that it was the weak Medivh who personally opened the dark portal and started the calamity of destruction. Alliance? Oh. The humans who seem to have crossed the sea to help us are good helpers. This is great. They even grandly brought along those who called themselves Sin, Dorii, but were actually blasphemers who called themselves Quell, Dorii. He still remembered that their abuse of arcane magic led to the invasion of the Burning Legion and the collapse of ancient Kalimdor. Countless night elves were massacred by the demons. Therefore, as early as 8,000 years ago, using arcane magic was already a crime punishable by death. We don't need reinforcements. Instead of trusting the greenskins who so recently raised their blades against our brethren, murdered Cenarius and destroyed our forests. It's better to use our own power to guard Mount Hyjal from the beginning than to trust those alliances that abuse magic like Quell, Dorii. The Alliance and the Horde are willing to protect Mount Hyjal together. Very well, if they really wanted to, they could set up a formation near the foot of the mountain. It didn't matter if they died fighting for the world or if they once again joined the Burning Legion. None of this will affect our defense plan. In the worst-case scenario, when they become traitors to Azeroth, we can activate the ultimate plan and completely destroy them along with the demons. When Tyrant forced the Night Elves to set up a defensive line halfway up the mountain, Fandral spoke again. I don't believe in their will to fight. Of course, if they threaten to retreat, we will close the teleportation passage to Mount Hyjal and force them to fight to the death with the Burning Legion. This way, whether they fight to the death with the Burning Legion or become the minions of the demons in the end, it makes no difference to us Night Elves. When the system repeated Fandral's words, Duque felt as if he was forced to eat a slime monster like it was jelly. It was disgusting. Damn it, I've been with the humans for too long. I actually forgot that Fandral was so protective of his people that he went crazy. In the end, he completely fell into depravity and kept courting death. At this moment, Duque had the urge to kill Fandral's Staghelm at all costs. Duque shouted domineeringly in his own spiritual world, System Elf, add the name of Fandral's Staghelm to the first place on my private black book that has been passed down from generation to generation. Remind me once every first of the month. Although you don't have any black book that has been passed down from generation to generation, it's not bad. Understood. Record. Categorize. Complete the reminders on time. The System Elf replied. The only fortunate thing was that Tyron still had the final say among the Night Elves. Tyron took a deep breath. I apologize to the Alliance for the radicals among the Night Elves. But at the same time, I hope that the Alliance can forgive us. After all, any organization or force has their own principles and way of doing things, as well as various worries. I'm glad that the Alliance has used your actions to prove your determination to protect this world. I only hope that after confessing, you can help me convince Thrall. As long as we hold on for one more day, or even half a day, the Night Elves will be able to make all the preparations. Preparations? Yes. The main force of the Night Elves has never truly left Mount Hyjal. They only went to the northern side of the mountain. As long as the main force of the Burning Legion's invasion enters the mountain path, we can mobilize the main force that follows the Tree of War to cross the mountain that outsiders can't cross and block the Burning Legion's retreat from the back. We'll attack from both sides. Finally, we'll use the Tree of Life to destroy Archimonde and his subordinates. Tyrant clenched her fists in excitement. However, Duque was dumbfounded. What the heck? They weren't going to use the entire mountain of lesser elves to self-destruct. In the next moment, Duque realized why this was the case. The World Tree was the lifeblood of the Night Elves. They would never do anything that might harm the World Tree until the very last moment. In fact, in the original history, after the Night Elves blew up the World Tree in Seamount, they lost the blessings of the dragons and were no longer immortal. They had always regretted it. The most obvious example was when Fandral planted the second World Tree, Nordrassil, in Darnassus. However, Duque had thought that the Night Elves were going to self-destruct all the lesser elves. In the end, the misunderstanding was huge. However, Duque remembered clearly that there was no such thing as deterring the army from the back in the original history. After killing the fourth boss, Khazroga, Tyron directly became a bystander. After giving the players a Kill You 3000 card parachute, she let the bitter players fight with Archimonde. Chapter 951. Duque didn't blame the night elves for having their own thoughts. Even the titans of creation had their own selfish motives these days. They would turn bad and fall. Look, didn't Sargeras learn bad things? Did he run out and start his own faction? With the intention of seeking common ground while reserving differences, Duque was very sincere in pulling the night elves, who were fated to be members of the Alliance, into the abyss of suffering that was the Alliance. Oh, it was a great united and loving family under Duque's control. Duque suddenly thought of something, and immediately reminded Tyrande, no. Mortals are useless now. We've already eliminated all the leaders of the Burning Legion's invasion force, except for Archimonde. According to Archimonde's habits, he'll personally take action soon. In front of him, all those who haven't entered the realm of heroes or are below the Radiant Moon realm are meaningless. Tyrande seemed very shocked. From the look on her face, Duque knew that empiricism was the death of one. Tyrande was one of the few who had witnessed the ancient war. She had seen with her own eyes that even the powerful dragons had to suffer under the horde of demons that blotted out the skies. However, the night elves were too secluded. For 10,000 years, they had never thought that the Burning Legion would have a commander who liked to fight in close combat. The Burning Legion still had at least 200,000 demons. Why would he roll up his sleeves and fight? Tyrande instinctively didn't believe it. At this moment, there was an urgent knock on the door. High Priestess. High Priestess. Are you there? Tyrande immediately knew that it was her trusted aide, Melon's voice. Come in. As a high-ranked priestess of the Moon Lady Church, Melon was definitely one of the best in terms of appearance and martial arts. Melon practically rushed in. Even though she tried to control her emotions, her face and eyes were filled with anxiety and fear. Ignoring Duque's presence, or perhaps assuming that Duque did not understand the ancient language of Darnassus, Melon nodded at Duque and quickly walked to Tyrande's side. Our ambush team has been discovered. The main force of the Burning Legion attacked our forces, and we can confirm that Archimonde was personally involved. Lord Shimurian has activated his ultimate combat technique. Based on initial judgment, Archerons is not injured. Tyrande's face paled in an instant. She clenched her fists so tightly that her knuckles turned white from clenching her fists. She raised her beautiful face and revealed a cold smile. She spoke in the same Darnassus language, but this time to Duque. Lord Marcus, your opinion is correct, the fighting power of mortals is meaningless. Melander jumped in fright. Didn't this mean that Duque had heard everything he had just said? Duque gracefully performed a Cadores ancient salute, his lips parting slightly. Vendel Oerinus Hindu. He paused for a moment before adding, Aner Endal Draken. This was actually a sentence made up of Salis phrases common to the Darnassus language. When put together, the meaning was, may the heavens have mercy on us and forget this failure. May we have the courage of a dragon to face new challenges. Duque's words were gentle and kind, filled with wisdom and determination to fight against evil. For a moment, the two priests almost thought that they were facing the wise demigod Cenarius instead of a young human. Tyrande and Melon crossed their arms in front of their chests and placed their fingers on their shoulders. They bowed deeply to Duque and spoke in the human language. In order to not let the sacrifices of our people be in vain, I hope that we can put aside our differences and work together to destroy the demon Archimonde. Greeting each other in the language of the other was already the most formal form of etiquette. In an instant, both sides had an inexplicable sense of goodwill and recognition towards each other. I'll have to trouble the night elves to prepare their last resort, Duque sighed. All right. Before that, let's inform the tribe. Duque and Tyrande went out together and told Thrall that the night elves' ambush had been wiped out by Archimonde. Thrall, Wajin, and the other chiefs all had very interesting expressions when they heard that the night elves' army of 100,000 had been annihilated. Tyrande spoke, the mortals' defense is no longer meaningful. The night elves have agreed to the alliance and the tribe's retreat. However, if possible, we still hope that each side can send their strongest to support this battle that will decide the fate of the world. The tribe had a quiet discussion, and the final result was a pleasant surprise for Duke. Apart from Varrock, almost all of the tribe's strongest fighters had chosen to participate in the battle: Thrall, Grom, Kane, Wajin, and Brock. Varrock. Lead the army back to Orgrimmar. If I don't come back, you'll be the next chief of the tribe. As soon as Thrall gave the order, Varrock Salufar cried on the spot, "Chief, I never thought that I was made for the position. You have to come back." On the other side, Kane was also instructing his deputy, "If I die, let Bane be the chief." The Alliance's side was even more so. The group of strong fighters who had come here were prepared to fight to the end. Those who should stay were all on the Eastern Kingdom's mainland. For example, at this point in time, Varian, who was not very strong yet, Abendis, who stayed behind to assist Queen Kalia, and Magni Bronzebeard did not come. Even the most unexpected situation for Duque had appeared. Jaina was actually instructing Egwene, "If I don't come back, go find Jaina Goldsword. I think she might have a child with my father. If not, he or she is the next king of Kul Tiras. If not, just make one up." Anyway, the legacy of Kul Tiras cannot be broken. Perhaps some people would ask, but Azeroth had been destroyed. What was the point of inheritance? This was related to another secret plan of the Alliance. Before Duque brought the large army to Mount Hyjal, he had announced that if they lost, he hoped that the remaining kings and leaders would lead all the survivors to open the dark portal again and find a way to find a new planet. At the very least, they could let the people take refuge in Draenor first. It was precisely because of this that the countries could send their strongest fighters to participate in the war without any scruples. The sun was setting. The army retreated from the portal like a tide. The tribe returned directly to Duroder. The Alliance soldiers teleported to Theramore. At this time, the strong fighters of the three sects had already gathered around Duque. Queen Sylvie smiled, "Duque, did you foresee this outcome? If everything could be done with foresight, then the so-called life is just thousands of boring journeys dominated by fate. To put it bluntly, there are countless paths in fate, and there is no absolute right or wrong. As long as it is my own choice, I will not regret it." Chapter 952. Half a day ago, at the foot of Mount Hyjal, the winner of a huge battle was decided. The ancient Tree of Life, Shemurian, as the oldest treant that had coexisted with the Night Elves for 10,000 years, it was undoubtedly very powerful. It was a pity that its opponent was Archimonde, the commander of the Burning Legion. Be it in terms of size, strength, or magic, Shemurian did not have an advantage at all. Moreover, the tree folk's natural trait of being slow made it impossible for it to gain any advantage against an opponent of the same size. In front of Archimonde, the old treant that was as tall as a 10-story building was just an extremely huge, punching bag. Ha ha ha. Ha 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 ha. Is this the killer move that you've been preparing for 10,000 years? Weak. Weak. Too weak. Being weak is a sin. The outcome of being weak is destruction. Facing Archimonde's maniacal laughter, the old treant shouted, "Every living being on this planet will resist the Burning Legion to the end. Resistance is useless. How would you know if you don't try?" The Tree of Life roared angrily. It moved its thick legs that were as tall as a 3-story house and began to launch its final charge at Archimonde. Not only the old treant, but all the remaining Night Elves in the vicinity launched their final charge at Archimonde. Ha ha ha. Archimonde pushed his left palm lightly as he laughed sinisterly. It was clearly just a seemingly meaningless press. However, the surrounding space seemed to have been subjected to an extremely heavy pressure. Everything in the field of vision was violently compressed into a large pancake. In the next second, the compressed space returned to its original shape like a spring. The terrifying impact that was so huge that it could cause mountains to collapse and the earth to crack suddenly exploded. Ultimate move, air explosion. The tall and slender bodies of the Night Elves were sent flying in all directions like grass being blown away by a strong wind. In fact, every one of them had already lost their lives in midair. They landed heavily hundreds of meters away, leaving only corpses that had lost their lives and souls. Thousands of ethereal soul fires that were like little sparks were forcefully gathered in Archimonde's huge palm. On that cruel face that was unique to Eridar demons, Archimonde's lips curled into a disdainful sneer. Soul. Punishment. Bright green, orange, rose red. Tens of thousands of night elves' souls were instantly tainted and forced to fall. The infamy of Archimonde the Defiler was on full display at this moment. Then, 3 types of evil spiritual lights that exuded an indescribably disgusting feeling landed on the old Trent's huge body at the same time. 1 step. 2 steps. 3 steps. Even though the old Ent tried his best to launch a final assault on Arkherons, but the tree bark that was once its skin had completely dried up in less than 3 breaths. Pieces of tree bark fell off by themselves and were blown away by the strong wind like sand on the ground. Its thick limbs continuously emitted high-frequency explosive sounds. Its rapidly decaying joints could no longer support the unimaginable weight of mortals. Its limbs, which used to be a single entity, were almost broken. The old Treant that had protected the Night Elves for more than 10,000 years finally couldn't hold on any longer. It didn't even have the chance to let out a final wail before its huge body exploded on the spot, turning into thousands of pieces that fell to the ground. Its huge body that was 10 stories tall instantly turned the flat ground at the foot of the mountain into a small hill made of wood. It was hard to imagine that just a moment ago, that should have been one of the cornerstones of the Night Elves, the ancient Tree of Life. Archimonde had single-handedly destroyed an army of 100,000 Night Elves, as well as killed the ancient Tree of Life, Shimurian. This was being played in the war conference room on Mount Hyjal. As expected, modern arcane magic still has its merits. Tyrande couldn't help but secretly rejoice that she hadn't listened to Fandral and tricked the Alliance and the Horde. Instead, she had first reached an agreement with Duque. When this video that even the Night Elves couldn't get their hands on was played 3 times by Duque, Thrall realized that his right hand was trembling slightly. This had nothing to do with courage, but was purely the most objective and straightforward reaction of his body and soul. In fact, it wasn't just him. Even Grom, a superhero who had killed 2 Lords of the Abyss, had shock and awe written all over his face. Everyone was probably asking themselves, do I really have a chance of winning against such a terrifying existence that only took an hour to destroy an army of 100,000? Think about it. Even the brave and fearless Horde hero had fallen silent, let alone the other powerhouses. But soon, the 2 heroes from the Horde and the Night Elves realized that the atmosphere wasn't right. On the Alliance's side, they were shocked, but that was all. Most of the powerhouses of the Alliance didn't have the slightest bit of disappointment or fear on their faces. Instead, they looked eager and excited. Following the line of sight of the powerhouses of the Alliance, the others suddenly realized that the focus of their gazes was on Duque. Queen Sylvanas sat by the window, feeling the chilly wind blowing in from outside. She didn't seem to care about Archimonde's strength at all in the face of the great enemy. She leaned against the window with her left hand and placed her right hand on her waist. With a rather lazy voice, she said, Duque, don't scare them anymore. Just say what you've discovered. Mograine also smiled. I've learned to analyze the enemy's situation and predict the enemy's methods and movements for more than a decade, but I still feel that I'm far from you, Duque. Please speak, Duque. For the victory of Azeroth, Sar said in a low, muffled voice. Duque didn't argue any further. He directly extracted the most crucial frozen image of the magic mirror. Everyone, please look at these images. These are the summary of Archimonde's combat power from when he descended on the Dalajan and half a day ago. I don't know if my summary is correct, but if you encounter similar situations in the upcoming battles, you might as well use my opinion as your first reference. First of all, this fire, I'll temporarily name it, Fire of Destruction. About every 30 seconds, Archimonde will create a fierce fireball. This fireball will move on its own and leave a wall of fire that is 2 to 3 yards wide where it moves. The wall of fire will disappear from the place where the fireball appeared after 27 seconds. I've calculated a total of 18 cases, and each time, the flames will only last for 27 seconds. No more, and no less. Then, I'll name this, Soul Charge. Duque seriously memorized Archimonde's strategy. He had to thank the strategy team back then for summarizing the old Archimonde's skills in such detail. Before seeing any new skills, Duque directly copied the strategy. But in the eyes of the powerhouses of the three sects, Duque was a god. Chapter 953. Before Duque traveled to this world, there was a very professional term called big data. Whether it was Microsoft or 360 antivirus, all companies in the internet industry like to collect user data, such as usage habits, how many times a user used the product in a week, when most users used the product, and how to improve it to give users a better experience. However, all big data was based on a large amount of basic data. Before Du traveled to this world, countries didn't even have military academies that specialized in training commanders. Learning to command? Apprenticeship. And this was the privilege of the knights and nobles. Basically, all the theoretical knowledge of the younger generation came from the personal guidance of the senior knights. After Duque came, he not only helped the dwarves and gnomes write a large number of scientific and technological development research manuals of this era, but also developed a series of training rules for officers. For example, he had to set the minimum discipline, so that the Alliance could unify command gestures, horn sounds, transmission passwords, and so on. In the military aspect, the most prominent innovation was the battle analysis and sand table deduction. How to infer the opponent's ability, possible evolution direction, and possible hidden backups from the opponent's battle record. As a result, Duque first threw out more than a dozen screenshots of Archimonde using a certain skill to kill someone at random. From the starting gesture, to the glowing hand, to the magic effect, all of it was a screenshot, a dynamic slow-motion mirror image played repeatedly. In the beginning, Duque still used uncertain words such as may, should, and probably, to indicate that his speculation was not 100% correct. However, with the deepening of the brainwashing, even those in the tribe who rushed forward in a fight and relied on their instincts to face the big moves began to learn seriously and humbly, not to mention the Alliance heroes who originally trusted Duke. To be honest, if Archimonde was a boss that could be easily killed, he wouldn't have had to painstakingly pull the Horde onto his warship, and even painstakingly protect the most powerful Horde hero, Gromhellscream. Every time a team member dies in battle with Archimonde, his soul will be captured by Archimonde. After Archimonde captures the soul, he will consume the soul after 5 to 10 seconds to use a powerful destructive spell. As for the specifics, I haven't come to a conclusion yet, but the battle must be built on a premise, and that is, we must do our best not to sacrifice anyone. Once someone dies, it will be easier to cause a collapse. Commander Du kept trying to brainwash them, he kept emphasizing all the important points. The only fortunate thing was that after he finished the brainwashing lesson, Archimonde, who was arrogant to the core, did not rush to Shengershan overnight. This gave the allied forces of the three sects an unimaginable breathing space. Just for this, Duque would wake up laughing even in his dreams. On the day of the decisive battle, Archerons finally arrived. There was no need for any alarm bells or anything. His voice was so loud and clear that it sounded like 100 loudspeakers had been turned on. It actually traveled from the foot of the mountain to the top of the mountain. Tremble, mortals! Despair! Destruction has come. Resistance is futile. Your world will be burned to ashes. Your soul will be reset to zero forever. Everything will be devoured. I am the end of everything. The loud declaration echoed through the sky. On the top of the mountain, almost every century-old tree let out the rustling sound of leaves. The wooden house creaked and groaned, as if the sound waves alone were already too much for the house to bear. Walking out of the house, looking at the falling leaves, there was a feeling that everything was dying and falling into destruction. From the top of Mount Hyjal, it was impossible to directly see the foot of the mountain, but this did not prevent the heroes from seeing where Archerons was through the red sky in the distance. Different from the blue sky and white clouds between the foothills of Mount Hyjal, Archaron's was definitely a superhero who had his own background image and background music. Above his head, there were rolling violent red clouds. That kind of mud-like chaos, coupled with the dull sound that sounded like thunder. Everyone would feel fear, the only difference was whether it was more or less. Standing at a place where they could see the mountainside, Duque and Jaina stood side by side. In front of this super boss who seemed to move slowly, but could actually move more than 50 meters with a single step, Queen Sylvanas, who was an agile type of hero, became slow and unsuitable for scouting. Duque, Archaron's body, yes. This guy has grown taller again. Duque also had a bitter taste in his mouth. He also could not understand why a demon could grow taller after having more power. This guy was already tall enough. With a height of nearly 100 meters, any titan was just a dwarf in front of him. Alright, after this guy went to the foot of the mountain to play a round of massacre, he had grown to a height of 50 stories when he came back. The power of darkness on his body was so violent and vast. Just the aftermath that flowed out caused the entire mountain path and even the cliffs within a radius of nearly 1,000 meters to wither. The grass instantly withered. The trees decayed in the blink of an eye. Even the black soil that contained more moisture instantly dried up and turned yellow, turning an ominous brownish red. This was very similar to the cursed land near the Door of Darkness. The nearly 20-meter-tall city wall near the mountainside had once caused countless demons to suffer on the spot, but now it was like a toy. With a light kick, Archaron sent the entire wall flying. Thanks to the astonishing craftsmanship of the dwarven craftsmen and the stronger steel structure, after Archaron's kicked the concrete attached to the steel bar support net did not explode immediately. Instead, it wrapped around Archaron's feet like silk threads. Just as Duque was wondering if he could use the steel bar to trip the horse, fire of destruction came. The flames that appeared out of thin air under Archaron's feet easily melted the 100-meter-long steel bar net into molten iron in less than a second. Duque and Jaina were tongue-tied. Tyrant had appeared beside Duque at some point in time. She was riding on one of her signature white tigers. The usually majestic white tiger actually let out a timid roar when it saw the gigantic ack. Duque, you were right. A mortal army can only ruin things in front of such an existence. With that, Tyrant suddenly clamped the tiger under her. The white tiger immediately understood and turned around to leave. Who would have thought that Thrall would come again, riding a giant black wolf that was not much smaller than a water buffalo? Duque. Thank you. At least you didn't let the good men of the tribe die in vain. Chapter 954. Sar left as well. Just as Duque was about to teleport away, Jaina grabbed Duque's hand. Her soft palm was trembling, and there was a faint moisture on it. It was sweat. Duque, will we win? Can mortals really win against such an opponent? Will I really be able to take revenge one day? Facing such an enemy, as long as one was not a lunatic, it was inevitable to feel fear. Looking at Jaina's beautiful eyes, Duque smiled. Yes. He definitely will. And it will happen today. Duque was so certain, and his words were so passionate. That almost unreasonable confidence filled Jaina's heart. Hundreds of meters away, Queen Sylvanas, who was holding a bow and arrow, suddenly saw the two figures beside her suddenly overlap and then instantly separate. Queen Sylvanas spat fiercely. Bastard! If I survive today, I will definitely teach you a lesson. The earth-shaking footsteps were getting closer. Even closer. The closer they got, the more shocking the feeling of the earth shaking and mountains shaking became. The mortal army had all retreated. If Archimonde summoned ordinary demons, they would naturally attack again. If Archimonde was alone, then this would be a stage that belonged only to the strong. Finally, Archimonde's enormous body appeared at the peak of Mount Hyjal, on the stage chosen by the three factions. In front of the 50-story boss, mortals were as insignificant as ants. Ha ha ha. Ha 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 ha. I thought that the so-called brave warriors who were fighting against the Burning Legion had all run away in fear. What, your so-called army of hundreds of thousands is only left with these few people? Ha ha ha. Archimonde's maniacal laughter reverberated throughout the entire basin-shaped mountain peak. Even though he was speaking in the Eridar language, Archimonde's words pierced through everyone's minds and into their minds. If mortals were here, they would probably have had a mental breakdown and died. Tyrande was dressed in bright silver armor and rode a white tiger. She walked out of the crowd and shouted in a clear and sonorous voice, "Archimonde! We will destroy you here and today." Huh? A playful expression appeared on Archimonde's mountain-like face. He stretched out a huge finger and hooked it. What other tricks do you have? Come on, I'll take them all. Next to him, Malfurion shouted, "Accept the punishment of justice." Archimonde the Defiler. The next moment, Archaerons was suddenly surrounded. Amidst the green fog that had appeared out of nowhere, four towering figures that were almost as large as the Archaerons appeared. Upon closer inspection, one would realize that these four mountainous figures were the Ancient Tree of War, the Ancient Tree of Wisdom, and the Ancient Tree of Wind. Treants were a special race that lived in symbiosis with the Night Elves. They had a special and lofty status in the world of the Night Elves. Before this, Malfurion claimed that he could definitely weaken Archimonde. Now, Duque finally understood how he could do it. This was the power of the Emerald Dream. He could summon the ancient trees that had been dead for many years in the real world and lived eternally in the Emerald Dream. He could use the power of the dream to suppress Archimonde to the greatest extent. Obviously, Malfurion and the Treants had succeeded. Countless green spots of light of various sizes emerged from the illusions and directly invaded Archimonde's body. In his field of vision, Archimonde's body, which seemed to be boundless, was shrinking rapidly. It was a very strange scene, as if an iceberg was melting 70 to 80% in a few seconds. After a while, Archimonde's body finally stabilized. The four phantoms of the ancient trees seemed to be trying to suppress Archimonde's power, but no matter how they waved their arms to activate the power from the Emerald Dream, Archimonde's height was still fixed at 15 meters. Although the fifth floor was still very high, at least he could see everything in his field of vision. It was completely different from the 50th floor where he could barely see the top. Huff, 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 Archimonde panted. There was no fear on his face at all. Instead, there was an expression of eagerness. As the vanguard of the Burning Legion and the self-proclaimed god of war, Archimonde had never been afraid of the enemy's traps. All he cared about was whether his opponents were strong enough, or whether they could bring him greater pleasure in killing and destroying. He was not surprised that the ants of Azeroth could weaken him to this extent. Instead, he was delighted. Ha! Ants, do you think you can defeat me just because you've weakened me? Not enough, it's still not enough. Do you have more surprises for me? The tentacle-like beard on Axe's chin wriggled nimbly, causing the heroines who loved beauty to frown. Malfurion moved closer to Duque. Really, is that all? Just weaken his defenses and shrink his body. In Malfurion's mind, Archimonde's attacks should have been weakened, or he should have been weakened in all aspects. Instead of using 20% to reduce Axe's body and 80% to reduce his defenses. No. That's good. If we don't reduce his defenses, then we really can't fight. Duque would always remember how thick Archimonde's skin was when he descended. The attacks of the Breaking Dawn Wizard Tower couldn't break his defenses. Coupled with Axe's terrifying vitality, it wouldn't be enough for the elites of the three sects to die 100 times. Only reducing his defenses and not his attacks. Even if this was a crazy move like walking on a tightrope, at least they still had something to think about. Without further ado, the great war that would decide the fate of the world began. Cain! Duque ordered. The bull-headed chief, who was the most muscular among them, stepped out. No one would have thought that there would be such a wonderful mockery in this world. Cain's rough bull face was filled with a rich expression of disdain. It was one thing for him to look down on the boss of the Burning Legion. He even did something exaggerated. He pointed at Archimonde with his thick finger and then at the nightmare's panther's poop on the ground. There was a dung beetle on top of the poop, making a ball out of it. The old bull stepped on it with his hoof. Paw! The pitiful dung beetle and the poop were crushed into a ball. Duque couldn't understand the old bull's mockery. Was he saying that Archimonde was a pile of poop? Or was he a demon who only knew how to play with poop? Was the dung beetle his true form? Alright, who cares what the hell this is? In any case, Ak was furious. He roared and charged at the old bull who had raised the interstellar hand gesture. Yes, he retracted his left and right fingers, leaving only the middle finger. Chapter 955. As a pharaoh, whether it was before or after transmigrating, Duque did not understand how a warrior's taunt skill worked. Could it be that he would shout, "Grandson," when he saw something strange? Then, the monster would be angry. The head of state would be angry. Even a guy like Archaron's would be angry. Archaron's really went to look for Old Bull. Speaking of which, Cain was still very young at this time. Why did Duque like to call Cain Old Bull when he saw that he had a long beard? Alright, regardless of him, the effect was surprisingly good. Archimonde raised his fist high. Even though he had only roared, Duke felt that Archimonde was saying, "You might die with one punch." That kind of punch was like throwing an excavator at him, and Duke's small body definitely wouldn't dare to take it. Then, Cain vomited blood from the punch. The huge totem pole was a super heavy weapon to beat people up. It was also a defensive artifact. Cain's totem pole was thicker than the main beams of many human houses. The old bull took a horse stance and raised his totem pole to receive Archimonde's punch. The result was that the old bull dug 2 3-meter-long pits on the ground and spat out a small mouthful of blood. This was definitely beyond Duque's imagination. However, this also proved that there was a chance. Cain had clearly suffered a small injury after taking Archaron's punch. His neck turned red and he slapped his chest with his empty left fist. He shouted, "Again. Again. As you wish." This time, Archaron's took a deep breath and retracted his long right arm. Then, he punched out like a thunderclap. The momentum of this punch was definitely full marks. Even if Cain had boasted that he could definitely withstand it, Duke still felt that it was like using a pile driver to hammer a piece of beef. The cow's head that was hammered with a small hammer would be softer and more chewy or something. Fortunately, Brother Bull was not a simple warrior. A roar of "Ha!" seemed to be announcing to the world how ferocious the Taurans who were born in the arms of Mother Earth were. His hooves, which were planted firmly on the ground, suddenly had a strange change in color. It was a kind of dizziness, as if he and the earth around him had solidified and become one. Duque's intuition was right. Archaron's powerful punch didn't turn the old bull into minced meat. Instead, it caused the ground within a radius of 300 meters to sink. Even though it was only a centimeter of subsidence that was difficult for mortals to detect, the system elf still notified Duque at once. Duque couldn't help but praise Old Cow in his heart. Of course, battles in real life weren't as brainless as in the game, where the boss would only beat up the guy with the strongest defense. In a group attack, Duque preferred to call it a diversion. The second person to rush forward was Mograine. The Ashbringer, which was as big as a door, slashed down without any fancy moves. The long light that was as bright as the falling stars sank into Archimonde's calf. Even with Ak's thick skin and flesh, he felt a wave of pain. Who is this guy? With this small question in mind, Archaron's bent over and swept his strong forearm, which was nearly 4 meters long, across the ground. Crack! Accompanied by a deafening sound, the thick ground was like a large piece of ice cream being scooped out by a spoon under the demon commander's extraordinary strength. A large piece of mud that could be used as a single room was blasted away. The aftershock of the impact swept out, and the entire cobblestone path not far away was flattened. The shockwave hit a wooden house of the night elves in the distance. At that moment, the entire house seemed to let out a painful sound. On the ground that sank on the spot, cracks spread rapidly in all directions. In less than a second, the entire house didn't even collapse. Instead, it directly exploded. Every piece of scattered wood and stone was wrapped in destructive flames with the power of darkness. However, as the main target of this attack, Mograine didn't move. Under his feet was a cone-shaped island that was radiating radiation. What spread out was only the aftershock of Archeron's attack. The huge arm itself was stopped by the huge sword of holy light that was leaning on the ground like a crooked door. Mograine was like a pillar of support as he stubbornly withstood the demon commander's shocking attack. This wasn't the end. The moment his arm was blocked, Turayan charged forward. The godly sword, Quell, Zerum, pierced through Archimonde's arm from the outside, and a small bloody hole appeared on the left side of Archimonde's arm, and a ray of golden holy light escaped from it. To the gigantic demon commander, the wound looked like a swollen human after being bitten by a mosquito. In fact, the internal injury was far more serious than it looked from the outside. It could already be considered a minor injury. This is impossible. Archeron's finally let out a strange cry. Even though he had greatly reduced his size in order to descend and had to accept the weakening of his power, in his imagination, there was no mortal in the world of Azeroth who could withstand even 10% of his power. But now, 1.5 was nothing. However, it was 3 mortals who blocked him time and time again, hurting him. Ak felt a kind of anger. It was the kind of anger he felt when he was hurt by ants he looked down on. To him, this was no different from being humiliated. In the next second, someone really did slap his face. For some reason, Orgrim was obsessed with throwing hammers. The hammer of destruction, which was bigger than a human head, was not even comparable to a toy in front of Archeron's. However, it was this hammer that drew a beautiful line of fire in the air. Just as Turayan stabbed Ak, the hammer directly hit Archeron's left eyelid. Originally, with Archeron's extremely abnormal defense, it would have probably bounced off. After using the power of the Emerald Dream to weaken his defense, the effect was surprisingly good. Archeron's eye socket was slightly swollen, but it wasn't too serious. However, injuries were injuries. Even if it was just a small injury, it could easily accumulate into minor injuries, serious injuries, or even death. 3 heroes had injured Archeron's in a row, which immediately ignited the hope of the heroes. That's right. We can do it. After this great demon was weakened, he was no longer the invincible existence that was above all mortals. He could be injured too. Being injured meant that he had a chance of dying. At this moment, Duque shouted, "Let's go together." Chapter 956. If there was a chance, Duque wouldn't mind finding 24 demigod-level players who couldn't be killed and could resurrect infinitely to kill Archimonde. Wasn't it just a pain in the ass grinding? If their equipment was strong enough and their intelligence wasn't lacking, they could always be killed. Unfortunately, it seemed that Duque was the only one in this world who could resurrect and not change his race. In this Hell Mode instance dungeon that could only be played once, what Duque could do was to get the strongest helpers to kill the boss. With just a glance, Duque's heart was filled with boundless pride. Look! A bunch of fierce people. They weren't heroes, they were fierce people who were destined to enter the instance dungeon and become bosses. Now, they're all Duque's underlings. Well, they're not even members. The main members had to beg their grandfathers and grandmothers and pray that their families weren't messed up so they didn't need to open a tabac shop at night, or feed their children, or the dormitory's electricity would be cut off at 11 o'clock. It wasn't easy to pull these historically famous guys into the team. As long as they joined, they would definitely do their best to be good fighters. In the original history, only Tyrant, Jaina, and Thrall would participate in this super battle, but Du upgraded it to a super battle where the elites of the 3 factions gathered. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that if any of the members here died, it would definitely cause the fate of the team to collapse. On the other hand, they were definitely the best. The only fly in the ointment was that there were fewer healers and more warriors. Including Bishop Benedictus of Stormwind City, whom Duque had decided to transfer at the last minute, there were only 3 healers. It was bad enough that the leader of the Blood Elf Paladins, Riataline, was forced to be a healer. For the sake of the overall situation, the Cenarian Circle's great druid Malfurion had to run over to provide support. Originally, Duque was more worried about the orc heroes. After all, Grom, Thrall, and Brock were all used to fighting head-on. Who would have thought that all three orcs would have a talent for dealing with giant creatures? Needless to say, the older generation of orcs who mingled in Draenor in the early years, Lord Howl was a Goron killer. The 10-meter-tall Goron was never a pushover. Brock was also a hunter of large prey. What surprised Duque the most was Sal. He was 2.5 meters tall, but his movements were extremely agile. He was proficient in dodging, turning, rolling, and crawling. One had to know that even though Archimonde had shrunk, he was still as tall as a 5-story building. A simple wave of his hand, a kick, and a fire of destruction, would cause buildings of all sizes to crumble under his attack. Less than a minute after the battle started, the aftermath of the battle had already bulldozed half of the Night Elves' town. The Night Elves had built more than 100 buildings around the World Tree on the summit of Mount Hyjal. What was rare was that even in the face of Archimonde's crazy attack, even in the complex terrain where even Duque himself could not stand firm, Thrall and the other warriors were still able to attack Archimonde without losing their composure. Or cut off his toes, or cut off his sinking arms or body. Every time the giant axe flew, or the flaming hammer smashed, it would definitely bring new wounds to Archimonde. Archimonde was not a fool. When he found that his heavy movements could not catch the warriors jumping around his feet, he first set his eyes on a few healers. Unfortunately, he had found the wrong target. To chase after Malfurion, the great druid first turned into a night saber and fled agilely. With magic, he immediately turned into a mountain eagle and flew away. At the very least, he could turn into a black bear and use the bear's skin that had been strengthened by countless natural magic to resist Archimonde's attacks like an old bull. Fighting Riataline. It was not easy for a paladin to die. In addition, Riataline was standing closer to Mograine and Turalyon, so she had to be strongly blocked before she could hit anyone. It would have been the easiest to deal with Benedettas, but unfortunately, Archimonde was almost mad. Because he saw that there were a few inconspicuous hands of magic around the Bishop of Holy Light. At the critical moment, they pulled the only priest out of the danger zone. Interesting. Archimonde gritted his teeth and pressed the 5 fingers of his right hand in the air. The attack was coming. Air blast. The entire team in the south was blasted into the sky by the huge shock wave that could be called an air cannon. This long-range attack team consisted of Duque, Queen Sylph, Jaina, Solarian, and Boulang Bronzebeard. It was fine if they were suddenly blasted into the air by the air blast. Amidst the chaotic female screams, the 5 of them were able to slowly descend from the sky with the help of the slow fall spell, or the goddess tear, that Tyrant provided as a parachute. They did not fall to their deaths. But in the next moment, the few of them watched in despair as a huge shadow came crashing down on them. Having gotten rid of the other heroes, Archimonde pounced over. The moment he came up, he gave them a big slap. What did it feel like to be slapped by a huge palm that was at least 2 meters long when opened up? Frankly speaking, it looked like a tsunami. The wide green demonic hand created a sharp sound as it slapped over, like the shrill wail of a banshee. Not to mention that the rows of houses just now easily collapsed under the attack of this demonic hand. The most shameless thing was that at this moment, Archimonde's curse arrived. Evil magic that was like black ink quietly drilled into the bodies of Ling Kong and the others. The pain caused by the explosion of dark magic greatly affected the movements of the 5 of them. In the air, the 3 mages still had a way to save their lives. However, once Queen Sylph and Boulang were caught by the demonic hand, they would be finished. It was completely foreseeable that their bodies, which were incomparably delicate compared to the Ox-Head Chief, would definitely be crushed in an instant. In fact, even for the 3 mages, it was extremely difficult for them to dodge in midair that was filled with dark power. The most terrifying thing was that once someone was sacrificed, soul recharge would come immediately after. When the heroes fell apart, the shadow of the world's destruction was almost right in front of them. At this time, the only one who could save the situation was Duque. Suddenly, 4 of the lowest level, arcane impact, were unleashed. Of course, this kind of attack could not cause much damage to the 4 powerhouses, but the precisely calculated impact force allowed the 4 to perfectly dodge Archimonde's sweep. However, one of them was caught. Duque. Shock was written all over the faces of the heroes. I've caught a big fish. Archimonde laughed sinisterly. No, I've caught you. Duque laughed coldly. Chapter 957. Duque's voice was very soft. Apart from him and Archimonde, no one else heard him at all. The old comrades who knew Duque didn't understand why Duque would be captured, but the heroes who didn't know Duque were so scared that their faces turned green. The Night Elves and the Horde knew that the link between the 3 factions was Duque. Duque was the planner, and Duque was the commander. Duque was the key figure in the Battle of Mount Hyjal. If he died soon after the battle started, the battle would be over. On the other side, Tyrande was ready to use her ultimate move. Before she could activate Starfall, the Horde moved faster. Thrall had just given him a look, and Lord Howl's signature jump slash was used. Grom Hellroar raised, Blood Howl, high, ready to cut off Archimonde's fingers to save him. The next second, Grom's face darkened. Because he only jumped halfway when he saw another Duque. More than one person noticed that Duque was actually holding Sylvanas' slender legs with one hand and letting her sit on his shoulder. His other hand was holding Jaina's slender waist, and he floated down with slow fall. Well, there was also a hand of magic holding a cursing dwarf upside down. The reason for this was that Archimonde's powerful curse, Grasp of Army, was a little troublesome for a Radiant Moon Mage to remove. Duque could instantly remove it, so he did it in passing. The Duque caught by Ak was, of course, a clone. The problem was that the bitter Grom didn't know. In midair, Lord Howl and Duque made silent eye contact. First, a pair of crimson eyes the size of a bull's stared at Duque. That's your phantom clone. Why didn't you say so earlier? Duque returned an innocent look. You didn't ask? Grom's eyes widened even more bitterly. Damn it. I was thinking of repaying you for saving my life. I jumped for nothing. Oh no, I'm jumping. With such a big mistake, I would die in minutes against this kind of person. Duke rolled his eyes. Done. He doesn't have time to deal with you. Lord Roar immediately knew why. Aw! Archimonde's sudden scream almost broke everyone's eardrums. Everyone could hear the fury in the demon commander's scream, because a golden holy light was bursting out from his clenched right hand. At first, it only leaked through the gaps between the fingers, but in less than 1/10 of a second, it concentrated on the knuckle of the middle finger closest to the palm. Time seemed to freeze in the next second. The huge cyan middle finger that was thicker than a bucket was perfectly cut off. The incision perfectly followed the shape of the joint. Strictly speaking, only the muscles and skin were cut off. But a severed finger was a severed finger. 10 fingers are connected to the heart. This saying is not nonsense. That kind of heart-wrenching pain made Archimonde go crazy. Wah! Accompanied by the roar, the surrounding space began to tremble. The terrifying aura that flowed out from the demon commander actually caused the entire ground to shake. Even the wooden pillars of the houses that had yet to collapse 1,000 meters away creaked and swayed, causing sawdust and dust to fall. At the same time, a terrifying pressure that made people shudder spread out in all directions. This was not a simple pressure. The reason why Archimonde was known as the Burning Dusk, the creator of Purgatory, and the Defiler was not without reason. At this moment, many terrifying illusions involuntarily appeared in the minds of every hero who besieged Archimonde. These were not illusions that were fabricated out of thin air. All the illusions came from the worlds that Archimonde conquered and destroyed. They came from the residual pain of every victim at the last moment of their lives. They came from the desperate cries of their souls when they were forced to fall after being captured. It wasn't just 1 or 2 voices, but the shock formed by the convergence of thousands of despair and resentment. Archimonde used this most ferocious martial merit that belonged to him to make the most terrifying weapon. In this way, he displayed his reputation as a demon commander. The closer they were, the more they bore the brunt of the attack. Lord Howl was shocked and fell on the spot. The Tauren chief Cain, who was holding the totem pole, had a pale brown face and cold sweat dripping from his forehead. His pair of big bull eyes were lifeless, and it was obvious that he had lost his focus. Cain, who had clearly stopped moving, was kicked by Ak. His huge body rolled a few times and fell into the fire of destruction, rolling around in pain. However, the damage of the flames instantly matched the purgatory in his illusion. He fell deeper into the illusion of fear. If it wasn't for a large pile of snow falling from the sky and smashing into his head, causing him to wake up from his hallucination with a quiver, perhaps his injuries wouldn't be as simple as this. Cain subconsciously looked at the spellcaster. He was a little dazed. In theory, Duque, who had saved him, was still in a state of fear. What the hell is this? Of course, Cain didn't know that Duque had been hit by fear, and that the system elf had helped him. At a time like this, it was definitely a different matter. Unable to care so much, Cain spat out a mouthful of blood on the ground and rushed forward on the spot. While he was in a daze, Mograine and Turalyon, who had stronger wills, resisted the fear, this time and held Archimonde back. After all, there were only a few who could resist the fear or wake up early. There was Kale, who cried out in fear, Caponia, who ran around out of control and crawled even when she fell, and Thrall, who waved his weapon in an attempt to fight against the illusory enemy. In Jaina's mind, she saw countless pitch-black enemies baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. They broke into the palace where she had lived since she was young, reached out to tear apart her gorgeous robe, and scratched her tender skin. No! 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 She tried to open her eyes, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't. All she could see was darkness. Her seemingly strong heart was filled with frailty and helplessness. Jaina felt like she was a lone boat on a stormy sea, about to capsize at any moment and succumb to the boundless fear. When a person was in extreme fear, the most natural thing to do was to look for a life-saving straw. Even though the feeling was very weak, Jaina clearly felt that she had been hugging something. At first, it was a little blurry, but she soon realized what she was hugging. It was Duque. That's right. Duque. The man she was destined to be unable to break free from his hands, the man she would unknowingly get involved with even after the engagement was broken off. Countless times, she had thought that breaking free from the shackles of the strongest hero of humanity was a form of release. However, in the face of such a great enemy, in the face of unimaginable terror, Jaina suddenly felt that having a man to shelter her from the wind and rain and give her a sense of security was an incomparably happy thing. Chapter 958. The feeling became clearer and clearer. The demonic claws around her still made her tremble with fear, but the warmth from her left and the beating of her heart clearly told her that it was Jaina. The person who can protect you is right beside you. The throbbing in her heart grew more and more excited. It was the impact of breaking through the restraints of fear and nightmares, breaking free from all oppression. This was the final and most perfect redemption in the apocalypse. Filled with immeasurable excitement, Jaina finally lifted her long, curly eyelashes and opened her eyes. Duque! Duque! Two completely different voices called out the same name. Two faces with different styles were filled with the same excitement. It was a pity that the first thing they saw was not the young and handsome face they imagined, but each other as enemies. That's right. Unbeknownst to them, Duque had already changed his posture and was now hugging Queen Sylvanas' waist. As a result, the first thing the two queens saw when they opened their eyes was not Duque, but their rival in love. Very, very much. Humph. They snorted and vented the anger in their hearts, but when they saw Duque's dog eyes looking here and there, they did not know whether to look at Sylvanas on the left or Jaina on the right. The two queens burst into laughter at the same time. Still fighting over this at a time like this, the two competitive and smart women read the words in each other's eyes at the same time. It was a temporary truce and worked together to get rid of Archerons. Seeing that they were falling from the sky and about to hit the ground, the two queens, Queen Sylvanas and Jaina, pushed away lightly at lightning speed and pulled away from Duque in order to prevent the three of them from becoming a target. Only Duque was left. He did not understand why the two of them were angry first and then laughing. Duque could not be bothered with these personal matters for now. Archeron's widespread fear caused many powerhouses to rush into the river of flames in a state of fear. Other than Cain, Lilith, Caponia, Brock, and even Tyrande were affected. How could the destructive flame from the Burning Legion's big three be so easy to deal with? Even though Duque had gathered a large amount of frost elements and extinguished the flames on their bodies with a high concentration of frost aura, everyone still had large areas of burns on their bodies. Without any hesitation, Malfurion launched his ultimate move. He opened his arms, palms and face to the sky, and chanted. An overflowing feeling of spring instantly filled the entire space within a radius of 1,000 meters. The sky was full of twinkling stars, and the dazzling brilliance flickered ceaselessly along with the growth of all living things. Every injured expert felt a vigorous life force growing endlessly in their bodies. Ah! Lilith looked at her burned left arm in disbelief. After a sudden itch, the entire scab fell off, revealing new tender skin. Although Tyrande had expected this outcome, she still watched with satisfaction as her charred calf returned to its original state. She wasn't the only one. The white tiger beneath her shook off its burnt fur as it ran, and a large clump of fresher white fur grew out. That's right. This was the druid's ultimate move, tranquility. When used by a druid like Malfurion, he would definitely be able to pull you back from the brink of death even if you were on the brink of death. You would be able to jump around in no time. Well done. Thanks. Impressive. They spoke in different languages, but conveyed the same meaning. Although he was a little exhausted after using his ultimate move, Malfurion still smiled. However, the wiser experts such as Duque, Wajin, and Thrall all felt gloomy. No one knew when the next, mass fear, and, destructive flame, would come. If it came again, with the curse of, Army's Grasp, or, air explosion, even the thickest of champions would be in danger. Obviously, Malfurion's ultimate move could not be used at any time. In order to recover, he had already started to use, rejuvenation, and other small moves. On the other hand, Archimonde, who had lost his middle finger, was a little angry. Although as a powerful demon, his broken finger could be regenerated, the strength of his body was always inversely proportional to the difficulty of regeneration. Even for him, it would take a lot of effort to regrow his middle finger. Moreover, the effect of the combo just now was far from satisfactory. The commander of the Burning Legion probably did not expect that there would be a team that could survive under his terrifying combo. In his heart, he could not help but raise the level of Duque and the others from the level of ants to the level of beasts. The agile champions below annoyed Archimonde, so he picked the Tauren chief who was the only one who was willing to face him head-on. He roared, and his voice was like thunder from the 9 heavens. Filthy beast, kneel. A giant hoof stomped on Cain's head. The huge difference in size was often accompanied by an absolute difference in weight. In a head-on confrontation, this was the difference between heaven and earth. The weight that mortals could not bear was on Cain's head. Although he gritted his teeth and held the totem pole high, the heavy pressure like a falling mountain still made his body short, and his knees could not help but slowly bend. Ha! Ha 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 ha! In order to not let the troublesome fellows stop him, Archimonde directly used, air explosion, on his feet. The first to be blown away were the orc heroes. Then it was the humans. Even though Mograine and Turalyon had stabbed their holy swords into the ground to prevent themselves from being blown away, the 2 holy knights were still blown away when the ground was shattered. Although it was not far, it was a fatal gap. Seeing that no one could come close, Archimonde sinisterly released, Fire of Destruction, under his feet again. Although he had the physique of a giant and incomparable strength, he was still an Eridar warlock. Close combat and whatnot were all side shows in between casting spells. Yes. He wanted to burn the only person who dared to face him head-on, Old Bull, to death in front of this group of rebels. He finally understood that as long as the annoying Cain was no longer at the front, the others would not be able to withstand his strength. The rest of the people couldn't withstand his strength at all. He could chase them around like ducks and finally kill them one by one. Just as a ferocious expression appeared on his face and he was ready to quietly wait for the screams to come from under his feet, the fire under his feet was suddenly blown away. The next moment, he felt a sharp pain from his feet. He saw that a large chunk of his right toe had flown out of his right hoof. A voice that he deeply hated sounded again. "You bastard, I will make it so that you will never be able to step on anyone again." Chapter 959. Originally, when he saw the surrounding flames spreading towards him, Cain had already lost all hope. It was purely the glory of a warrior that supported him. Apart from him, no other hero of the three sects could contend with Archimonde's strength as a giant. As long as they changed from a positional battle to a pursuit battle, the damage output of any mage would be reduced by at least 40%. Yet in the entire team, there were the most mages. Cain could not retreat, and he could not retreat under the heavy pressure. Then, a miracle happened. Colorless wind blades brushed past his feet, and for a moment, Cain thought that his hooves were going to be cut off. With his perception of the power of nature, he immediately discovered that those wind blades came from Duque. Cain did not understand what was going on. He only knew that Duque's wind blades had scooped up all the grass and turf in one breath, rolled them into a ball in midair, and exploded them. Then, the surrounding flames were all gone, leaving only the black soil that emitted the smell of burning. It wasn't just Ak. The other mages were all stunned. No one could have imagined that such a method could be used to deal with those annoying flames of destruction. Kale, that was the first to understand. He pushed out with one hand before the fire burned him, using magic to lift the entire turf. Then, the moment before the flames of destruction burned him, he used magic to push the flames and the scorched turf away. The long river of flames was changed just like that. "I understand." Jaina and Ronan shouted in surprise at the same time. No one who could reach the radiant moon pharaoh was a fool. Flames were never something that could exist out of thin air. Any flame had to have a combustible object as a support. Either it could be ignited vegetation, or it could be a flammable gas in midair. Even though it was very difficult to use frost elements to fight against this demigod-level flame, as long as he pushed the flame away, he could change the course of the entire river of flames and keep himself and his teammates away from danger. Duque had invented this move. To Cain, he was just a pretty good teammate. He was still far from being a god-level teammate. Duque's next strike magnified Duque's image in his heart. If Duque had used a sneak attack to cut off one of Archimonde's fingers, no one could see it clearly. Now, at least Cain could see it clearly. It was an extremely thin and long sword. To the Tauren, it was like a long needle. It was clearly so thin that it was not suitable to be used as a weapon. He could not miss out on the golden holy light that blossomed from it. In fact, Arkharens had already reacted when he sensed the holy light that had injured him. He cried out in alarm. Just as he was about to raise his hoof, space seemed to be strangely distorted. On the tip of the right leaf-shaped hoof of the demon's hoof, a thin golden line that was almost identical to the one before suddenly appeared. Unlike how a butcher dissected an ox, Duque used the most violent method to cut off the incomparably thick and tough hoof, using the maximum output of the holy sword to chop off the horny layer on the hoof. If Arkharens's body had not been weakened by the Night Elf's Emerald Dream's ultimate move, Duque's strike would have been in vain. But there were not so many ifs in the world. As soon as the thin golden line appeared, it extended to both sides at high speed. The next moment, accompanied by intense pain, Arkharens saw his toe break in the middle. The black finger that was as large as the roof of a house flew out with a crack. It spun continuously in the air before crashing onto the black soil 10 meters away. Time seemed to have stopped at that moment. The demon commander's face was full of horror. He screamed, "No, if he had lost his finger, it could be said that he had been careless and fell for Duque's trick. However, the forceful counterattack this time made him fully realize that he, who had been weakened twice by the magic circle of planet Azeroth and the magic circle of Mount Hyjal, was much weaker than he had imagined. Bastard! 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 Archaerons roared and launched a wild attack. Just now, if he had continued to stomp with all his strength, he might have been able to find Cain for revenge. It was a pity that his toe had been cut off. This affected him too much. If he had been injured in the arm or body, it would at most affect his attack power. But the foot was the most troublesome limb. After losing a toe, Ak felt that his balance was obviously out of whack. This was a very dangerous sign. He had leg armor. The Golden Demon armor, forged by the Burning Legion's dark craftsman with the highest craftsmanship, protected his calf very well. And in his impression, there had never been anything that could hurt his incomparably thick and hard hooves. Now it was different. If he could not support his body and fell, then the melee professionals who had been besieging his calf would be able to attack his vitals more directly. Then there was a real possibility that he would die here. Archaerons brought out his real skills. 10 fingers, oh, it was now 9 fingers in a row. The air blast that had a gap just now suddenly became a continuous barrage. Although the air blast, with a wide range had become the air cannon, with a narrower attack area, its power had more than doubled. Boom! There was a loud noise, and grass and sand flew all over the sky. Many experts, including Duque, saw Brock's right arm suddenly twist in an extremely awkward position that shouldn't have appeared. If not for the flesh still attached, everyone would have thought that his entire arm had fallen off his shoulder. It wasn't just his arm. After he was accidentally hit by the air cannon, his whole body spun and crashed into a huge stone monument not far away. Brock, Thrall exclaimed. Unexpectedly, a fire phoenix that was not much bigger than Tyron's white tiger flashed past, its claws seemingly made of flames, saving Brock unscathed. He was saved, but Brock had clearly lost the ability to fight. Dislocations and sprains were the most troublesome. If it was just a simple injury, recovery spells could quickly heal the wound. If the limb was twisted or had a comminuted fracture, the broken bone near the wound had to be cleared first so that the bones could be placed in the right position before the spell could be cast. Otherwise, the bones would become crooked and the arm would be crippled. His eyes fierce, Duque dragged Brock away from the battlefield with Hand of Magic and shouted, "It's better to break one than to injure 10 fingers." Mograine and Terrain immediately understood what he meant. In the next moment, with Thrall's help, Mograine shot toward Archaeron's lower back like a cannonball. Chapter 960. As a powerhouse who always charged at the front lines, how could he not know that there were only 3 people who could truly threaten him after exchanging a few blows? 2 large holy swords in the open, as well as that orc who jumped up for some reason and was sent flying. Alright, I'll ignore that. Lastly, there's Duke, who looks like a mage but is actually an assassin. Yes. Duke Marcus. This was not the first time Archimonde had heard this name. While he did not care about it before, ever since Duque cut off his first finger, he was destined to engrave this name in his heart. He had already decided to imprison Duque's soul under his burning throne and let him suffer endless torture for tens of thousands of years. Unfortunately, before that, he had to face the threat behind him. Ha! Archimonde's huge body twisted violently, and his left fist smashed towards Mograine behind him. In midair, Mograine should not have been able to borrow any strength, but at that moment, a mass of arcane energy appeared out of thin air. With a light push from beneath Mogaine's battle boots, the incredibly heavy Mograine was able to complete a double jump that not even professionals could do. Even Newton's coffin couldn't hold him down anymore. Cough cough. It was this jump that caused Mogaine's threat level to skyrocket. Originally, he could only aim for Archimonde's waist, but now he was going for his neck. Without thinking, he changed his attack. His left fist that was originally sweeping horizontally turned into an uppercut. At that moment, 3 arrows arrived. Tyrande, who had been hiding her true strength, finally revealed her true abilities. Once, Fortify Aura was activated, the power of the Windrunner sisters' arrows increased exponentially. Their arrows, which were originally like mosquito bites to Archimonde, were instantly raised to the level of All's. Lilith's Wind Arrow was the first to arrive, activating Archimonde's tough skin resistance against natural attacks. Who knew that in the next instant, it would be Lightning Arrow, followed by Flame Arrow. 3 arrows in a row, almost hitting the same spot in unison. The last arrow broke through his defense and pierced deep into the joint of his left hand. Ah! Every creature's joints were extremely sensitive. Normally, a swollen joint would cause it to be unable to bend or anything, let alone a needle-like arrow. Ak froze on the spot. Die! Mograine roared, and the wide, Ashbringer, swung down at high speed. Surging holy light rippled in the air, forming a loud sound similar to a sonic boom. You're the one who will die. Archaron's finally revealed his trump card. It was a skill that did not exist in any version of history. His eyes suddenly turned bright red, and then shot out a crimson ray similar to the kinetic death ray. Duque was tongue-tied. For a moment, he almost suspected that Ultraman had gone to the wrong set. Mograine was hit right in the bullseye. Just when everyone thought that Mograine was dead for sure, they saw a dull golden light pierce through the crimson pillar of light and fall lightly. Save them. Grom, who had the best jumping ability, caught Mograine in one leap. This time, not only did he fail, but he also wasted a lot of Mograine's stamina and energy. This was not a good thing. Although it seemed that as long as one was devout enough, holy light could be cast endlessly. In fact, holy light was a type of spiritual power, which was closely related to a person's willpower and stamina. It is impossible for a weary, exhausted person to have much willpower. Fortunately, the real killer move was never Mograine. Not only did Duque activate Flash, but Turalian also arrived. The 2 holy swords of the same lineage shone at the same time and cut the heel of Archaron's right hoof. From the beginning to the end, Duque and the others' goal was to pick off the tendons. The 2 divine swords from the Pantheon were attacking together for the same goal. The light they emitted was even more blinding than the brightest sunlight. Ignoring the fact that the power that wrapped around Archaron's began to dissipate in fear, even the other members of the heroes' group couldn't help but turn around, not daring to look at the blinding light. This blow almost cut off the soul of the demon commander's foot. If it wasn't for a strange and terrifying intuition that enveloped Duque and Turalian, forcing them to stop, this matter would probably have succeeded. Even so, Quell Zerum succeeded in cutting off the tendons at the heel and continued the cut to the ankle. In severe pain, Archaron's fell to the ground. At this time, he finally realized that his huge body was not an advantage, but his most fatal weakness. He had to do something. Just as Grom was about to jump up and give Ak another hard blow, something that Duque had never expected happened. F*CK, Archaron's actually had a second transformation. The first time he was hit by the ultimate move of the Emerald Dream, Archaron's was forced to shrink. This time, he took the initiative to shrink. Although he was not that small, after using a ring-shaped wave of darkness to force away the melee heroes that surrounded him, he was still a giant standing in front of the heroes. However, his height was halved, and he was only 7 meters tall. Ha! Let's do it again. I'll make this guy shorter than me. Old Bull laughed and charged forward. Then, he courted death. Everyone imagined that Archaron's would definitely change. However, no one expected it to turn out like this. Old Bull went up. Old Bull rolled back. He had used all his strength and even the power of Mother Earth, but in the end, the Old Bull was slapped in the face. He did not die. Taurens were famous for their strong vitality, and most of them believed in Brother Spring. However, as Old Bull vomited blood, his face was filled with confusion. The most obvious thing about the shrunken Archaron's was that he had changed his appearance. He originally looked like a gladiator, but now, he had a cape and a skeleton scepter that emitted an evil and ominous aura. The scepter was actually more than a meter long, but in the hands of the 7-meter-tall Archerons, it looked like a short hammer. He was even shorter, so in theory, it should be easier to deal with. The warrior heroes, who were originally like dwarfs and could not reach Archerons' vitals even if they jumped up, had grave expressions on their faces. Duque suddenly understood why. Even though Ak was very tall just now, he only gave them the feeling of a tall building. Tall buildings could collapse, but mountains could not. Right now, Archerons was like a miniature mountain. Chapter 961. Duque had transmigrated, greatly altered history, and lifted the skirt of the goddess of fate. Just when he thought he could conquer fate, he was shocked to find that he was also being teased by the goddess of fate. Speaking of which, if the world of Azeroth was a person, then most of his physics knowledge was taught by his physical education teacher. A dragon could become a person, and then the extra dozens of tons of mass would disappear. Archimonde, who had shrunk to one size, was the best example. The current Archimonde gave off a more stable feeling, but his movements were more light and agile. Duque sent a clone directly behind Archimonde, and then everyone only saw Archimonde's sneer and Duque's clone silently annihilated in a round shield. Duque's pupils suddenly shrank. Big trouble, after Archimonde shrank, not only did his strength double, but it seemed that even his magic resistance had increased a lot. Archimonde calmly sneered loudly. Rejoice! Rejoice! You ants! You should be happy that in the past 10,000 years, for the first time, someone has forced me to use my most basic form. Although I've always yearned to be a god of war who charges at the front, I'm still a warlock. No matter how powerful his magic was, he was still afraid of a kitchen knife. In theory, that was the case. Thrall was the third to not believe it, and he threw his hammer again. Bang! This time, the hammer of destruction was directly hit by a blue shield bullet. Finally, someone lost his voice. Is Archimonde invincible? Duque disdained this kind of nonsense. Glancing over, he found that it was Kale, that's little Miss Caponia, who spoke, and Duque was annoyed. Fortunately, Kale, that said something fair. Impossible. There is absolutely no perfect and invincible existence in this world. Ha ha ha. I am perfect. I am the strongest. I am invincible. Archimonde's wild laughter came instantly. Duque was annoyed when he heard this. F***ck, F***ck, F***ck. What happened to being a big guy and being happily beaten to death by a group? Why did you change the script without permission? By the way, with your high magic resistance, will the other Radiant Moon mages still be able to play around? Moreover, warlocks knew martial arts. Old Cow would not be able to withstand it. Duque secretly ordered in his mind, system, analyze the weakness. 3 seconds later, Duque suddenly laughed shamelessly. Pooh! Archimonde, before you pretend to be invincible, can you not limp first? Archerons' final appearance was too shocking. As soon as he appeared, he sent Old Cow flying and even melted Duque's clone. This shocked the group of experts. Following Duque's words, everyone suddenly realized that Archerons, who seemed to have greatly strengthened himself, did not heal his own injuries. The broken middle finger was still losing purplish-blue blood. His right leg, which had a small part of his hoof and a broken hamstring, was still limping. Even though he could use his willpower to ignore the existence of the pain, the faint remnants of golden holy light around the wound seemed to be telling everyone, this is the target, aim here. He couldn't help but burst into laughter. Ha 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 ha. This is too funny. I've seen bragging, but I've never seen someone so good at bragging. Does the Burning Legion rely on bragging to determine their status? Led by Shorty, who had the least sense of propriety, they started scolding Archimonde in a multilingual manner. Heroes from all walks of life immediately turned into Internet Water Army keyboard warriors, scolding Archimonde until he was black and blue. Just as everyone was laughing wildly, Duque's whisper of the wind sounded in everyone's ears. Everyone, please pay attention to the color of Archerons' light shield. If I'm not wrong, red is the Hellhound mode, which mainly increases magic resistance. Yellow should be the Doom Guard, which increases strength and attack power. Originally, they had to pay the price of blood to try to deal with it, but with Duque's familiarity with warlocks and the System Elf's abnormal analysis, Archeron's possible changes were almost impossible to hide. With such amazing information, wouldn't everyone be able to fight the tycoons? Distribute the land. Oh, no, it should be, fight the boss and distribute the equipment, hee hee. Hee hee hee. Hee 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 hee. Very quickly, especially the orcs, everyone started to smile with ill intentions. It was as if, like sharks smelling the scent of blood, everyone gathered together again. Hee hee hee. I, the great Archerons, am really being looked down upon. With that, Ak raised his left hand, and a large meteor rain fell from the sky, crashing onto the ground around him. Not only that, with a sweep of his right hand, a river of flames made of fire of destruction, first moved to the left and then to the right, blocking in front of the heroes. Logically speaking, it should be the melee classes dodging, but who would have thought that the melee classes would roar and charge across the river of flames, directly reaching the other side of victory, and start attacking Archimonde with their weapons. It wasn't that they were crazy, but that Malfurion and the other healers were desperately supporting them. Almost every melee hero had the Great Druid's powerful continuous HP recovery spells, heal, and rejuvenation. Those who were more seriously injured could even enjoy the more powerful, swift heal, or life bloom. What? Archerons couldn't hide the shock on his face. In the next moment, he directly activated fear. The fear magic that had destroyed countless planets and plunged countless races into despair and nightmares became ineffective after the warriors uniformly activated Furious Fury, which could resist the fear effect. No, it wasn't just the warriors. Benedict also gave Turayan a protection fear barrier. In the past, the scene of everyone being hit by fear and running around like blind flies was gone. At the very least, the three warriors, Cain, Lord Howl, and Thrall, along with Turayan, were chasing Archerons and slashing at him. If it was any other time, everyone would have thought that they had taken the wrong medicine. But at this moment, the horror on Ak's face was the best contrast to their bloodthirsty and ferocious expressions. That's impossible. Archerons cried out. Ha! Idiot! We've already seen through your trick. Cain laughed out loud. He shouldered the raging flames and charged forward, sweeping his pillar strike horizontally. As if to prove how right Old Cow's cheap laughter was, the scene of the disparity in strength seemed to have been reversed. Bang! A dull thud rang out. Archerons was like a little wife who had been slapped by domestic violence and could only cry in the corner. He fell on his butt. Almost at the same time, the three muscular men leaped up and slashed at Archerons. Chapter 962. A few seconds of fear passed in the blink of an eye. Every hero who had recovered from their fear watched in shock as the four macho men chased after the battered and exhausted Archimonde. He was not pretending to be in a sorry state, but he was really in a sorry state. His rather large body was more like a target. It seemed that Archerons had rolled on the ground at least twice. Why was this happening? Obviously, it had something to do with Duque's order to, warriors, attack with all your might. The fierce men were having fun slashing at him. Turalyon, who was the most stable, cut off a few pieces of meat from the great demon's right calf and decided to carry out the plan of crippling his leg first. Thrall was not careless either. He cooperated with Turalyon and left a square-headed burn mark on Ak's right calf. Cain was the most unscrupulous. He picked up a pillar and smashed it at Ak's waist. It did not seem like the result was obvious, but it was actually a cover for Grom, who was the most violent, to slash at Ak's face with Blood Roar. Master Roar had a good time slashing. He did not hold back at all when faced with Archerons, who could only raise his arms to defend. With a few slashes, he left a few huge wounds on Ak's arm that were so deep that bones could be seen and blood gushed out. Just as they were slashing, Duque's voice rang out again. Retreat! Without hesitation, as if they were minions who had shouted, "Run for your lives," 3 of the 4 macho men who were still slashing fiercely a moment ago suddenly scattered in all directions. They ran so fast, unwilling to stay where they were. Only the thick-skinned old bull squatted on the spot and snorted at Archerons with an infuriating expression. He was clearly saying, "Come on. Let's hurt each other." Just as the fierce men completed their transformation, the light barrier on Archerons' body switched to a khaki color. Blazing magic radiance lit up in all directions at the same time. Ronan, Caponia, and Solarian worked together to create an arcane light ball that was too huge and far beyond the scope of a missile. Looking at the rising purplish-blue mushroom cloud, perhaps it would be more appropriate to call it arcane nuclear bomb. Before the arcane wave dissipated, Kale, Bats and Jaina each blasted out a phoenix. Fire Phoenix, Prairie Fire. Phoenix, Absolute Windstorm. The 2 principles were the same, but the elements used were worlds apart. One used ice to freeze Archimonde's upper body, while the other used flames to roast Ache's lower body. This allowed the commander of the Burning Legion to enjoy a clash of ice and fire. Meanwhile, Duque's Frostfire Apocalypse, which had condensed almost half of his Breaking Dawn mana, turned into a huge spiral and sent Archerons flying. It was a high fly ball that traveled 200 yards straight to the outfield. Cough, cough. He was wrong. That was the dark history of the Burning Legion's commander, who had been brutally blasted dozens of meters away like a piece of trash. Archimonde's body was still considered huge, but in front of a group of ants, he was like a dog eating shit. He struggled to get up, only to discover that he was once again surrounded by the ants he had looked down upon half an hour ago. Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! Archimonde had been growing his middle finger, but now he really wished he could grow a few more middle fingers to point at Duque. Archimonde's tragic situation was in stark contrast to the calm smile on Duque's face. "Everyone, do you remember? The dark blue shield is for defense in close combat. It's strong in defense and weak in attack. The yellow shield is for strengthening close combat. The warrior and knight will leave, and the mage will attack. The red shield is for high magic resistance, and it's for close combat." Duque emphasized patiently in the whisper of the wind. To put it bluntly, Archimonde had indeed returned to his roots and focused on his warlock abilities. Even the power of a warlock wasn't like cabbage that fell from the sky for no reason. Unlike ordinary warlocks who needed to summon demon servants to have the corresponding support power, as the commander of the Burning Legion, Archimonde could directly use the power of a certain type of demon. There was a problem here. For a period of time, he could only use one type of demon power. After all, the demon guard that focused on close combat and the hellhound that focused on magic were completely different types of power. It was impossible to master them. It was precisely because Duque had used the system to analyze Archimonde's power attribute and even accurately calculated how long each power could be maintained. That was why he had attacked so crazily just now. Before transmigrating, changing the attack mode to change the damage output was definitely a rotten trick. At this point in time, this was definitely the first time something new had appeared. Unfortunately, in front of an experienced driver like Duque, an old leader, it was simply no worth it. 1. Raise. It was shocking for Ache, but it was a blessing for the hero team. Without Duque's command, they would either be wiped out after a few random attacks, or they would have to pay a heavy price to find out the pattern. It definitely wouldn't have been so easy. After so many rounds of intense battle, only Brock was seriously injured and had his arm broken. It was truly a miracle. Duque stepped out from the crowd and took out a feather fan from his interspatial bag. He waved it like a pig. "Archimonde. This day next year will be the anniversary of your death." It was extremely pretentious and F***ed up, but everyone felt relieved when they heard it. "Humph. You bunch of ants are worse than scum." A big shot was a big shot. He had been defeated like a dog, but he was still very stubborn. However, the next moment, Duque realized that something was wrong. Several experts suddenly touched their chests, intentionally or unintentionally. It was a palpitation of unknown origin, as if something had entered their bodies. No, it might even have entered their souls. However, they knew nothing about this mysterious and strange existence or some evil power. Looking at the system notification, Duque's face turned green. He couldn't help but exclaim, "Curse of misfortune." Hee. Smart, but knowing it doesn't mean you can deal with it. An evil smile appeared on Archimonde's face. Then, it was his turn to attack. As the boss of the Burning Legion, there seemed to be no restriction of only being able to use one curse on a target. Curse of pain, that caused damage. Curse of weakness, that reduced the target's damage. Curse of elemental, that reduced the target's resistance to shadow and frost. He gave all the curses that could be used to Old Cow. These weren't the main point. The main point was the curse of misfortune, that killed people. The curse of misfortune was a curse that had a delayed effect. It was fine if the damage was extremely high. The most terrifying thing was that once someone died under the curse of misfortune, an apocalypse guard would immediately be born from the dead person's corpse. There were all-powerful experts in the hero domain. Who knew who would die under the real curse and what level of demon would be born? It might not even be rare for a demon lord to be born. Duque's face turned green. Chapter 963. As a transmigrator, how could Duque not know about the one-button undoing curse? Countless players complained that dispelling curses and whatnot was like whack-a-mole. Whoever lit up would win. As someone who had the system elf, of course. Duque wouldn't use such a cheap and stingy thing like one click to remove curses. He would always give it to the system elf, and it would automatically remove curses. Most of the time, many people who were cursed would instantly feel a chill and then feel nothing, because Duque had undone it in less than a tenth of a second. However, Archimonde's curse of misfortune was clearly of a different dimension from other curses. Other curses were like a slipknot on a rope. As long as the source and target were found, it was very easy to solve. Why was the curse of pain painful? It couldn't be solved because it was painful. It was because the curse of pain had secretly blocked someone's blood vessels and caused internal injuries. That was why the victim would constantly be hurt in an intense battle. Now that he understood it, he just needed to dispel the dark power. The principle was not much different from preventing a stroke. The curse of misfortune was like putting a big basin full of wet and messy cotton rope, and then saying, "Come on, untie me." Its degree of difficulty and complexity was definitely higher than the other curses with a difficulty coefficient of 1. Open a few more cubes. The problem was, if it couldn't be undone, they would die. Even if they entered the realm of heroes, how could the physical strength of mortals compare to extraordinary beings like dragons who had super long HP bars? Everyone knew how troublesome it was. The moment the mages sensed this curse, almost all the pharaoh were dumbfounded. No. I can't undo it. Caponia and Solarian were the first to give up. Duque, I. The former elf prince's face was full of shame and shame. I can't either. Jaina gritted her teeth and showed a resentful expression. At first, Duque thought that Ronan couldn't do it either. Unexpectedly, Ronan gave Duque a huge surprise. I can guarantee that I can take care of myself and a specific target before the curse breaks out. On the other side, Malfurion, the great druid who could also remove curses, frowned. I can also be responsible for a target other than myself, but my healing ability will be weakened. Now was the time to make a decision. While it was safe to retreat, it would also greatly weaken the team's attack power. It wasn't impossible to fight head-on, but the risk would increase exponentially. Duque gritted his teeth and said, "Only 10 people. Ronan will take care of himself and Cain. I'll deal with the other 8. Cain, Grom, Thrall, me, Ronan, Alexandros, Turalian, Servanas, Tyrant, and Malfurion will stay." Duque quickly decided who would stay on the battlefield. In other words, the rest of you should leave immediately. Everyone was eager to participate in Archeron's final kill. Unfortunately, strength was an incomparably cruel dividing line. If you have the ability, then go up. If not, then go down. Shamelessly staying in the team was irresponsible to themselves, their teammates, and even the entire world. Jaina raised her staff and shouted, "Duque! You must win. I'm waiting for you to avenge me. Everyone, let's go and block the mountain entrance. Don't let a single demon in." After Jaina led the slightly weaker champions away, there were suddenly only 10 champions and Archerons left in a radius of 1,000 meters. No. No. It shouldn't be like this. It can't be like this. Archerons had many tricks up his sleeves, but Duque was too experienced. With the help of the system elf, his dirty tricks were often completely seen through by Duque the moment they started. Even though many champions had left and their attack power was inevitably weakened, Archeron's life force was indeed weakened. The situation was so bad that he had to make a decision. At the beginning, Archeron's idea was to cruelly crush the ants in front of him, then walk over majestically, destroy the World Tree, and absorb the power of the World Tree and the Well of Eternity. But now, this idea was definitely different. Accomplishing both at the same time had become an unattainable task. However, there was still a chance of accomplishing one goal. Suddenly, Archeron's entire body was covered by a large blue cover. Not only that, but a void demon that was even larger than him rose from his back. He wants to be a turtle until the end? Duque's first reaction was to be surprised. As the saying went, defending for too long was bound to fail. Blindly defending would not end well, unless, seeing Archerons give up on dealing with the other champions, turning around Cain and charging towards the center of the mountain, almost every champion suddenly realized that something was wrong. Not good. He's going to force his way to the World Tree. Tyrant's face paled. Stop him! Malfurion roared, his hands digging into the ground. Immediately, huge thorns as thick as a water bucket burrowed out of the black soil and wrapped around Archeron's legs. Not enough. Far from enough. Mere thorns could not stop Archerons, whose legs were covered in destructive fire. Using the flames of destruction and extraordinary brute force, Archerons was like a train that had lost speed, charging towards the World Tree without looking back. That's right. The World Tree. Only by absorbing the power of the World Tree could he recover from his injuries and turn the tables. If this continued, he would only be exhausted to death by Duque and the others. Full attack. Duque's heart-wrenching roar echoed in every champion's heart. Queen Sylvanas stood on one leg and used a special secret technique to instantly strengthen the bowstring by several times. Then, she knocked a thick arrow that was comparable to a siege hammer. The sound of the arrow leaving the bowstring was like thunder. Ronan stacked 36, Arcane Impact, in one go and activated, Arcane Energy. Whether it succeeded or not, the next attack would empty every drop of magic power in his magic circuit. He would not be able to cast even a low-level spell in a short period of time. Thrall used, Hammer of Destruction, with all his strength. All the champions used their ultimate skills. Unfortunately, it was not enough. The Eridar demon's body was too strong. Even if Mograine used all his strength to swing, Ashbringer, to destroy that damned barrier, even if Turalion used, Quell, Zerum, that was infused with all of his holy light to cut off Archimonde's right leg, he still could not stop Archimonde from creating another barrier and stumbling towards the World Tree, Nordrassil. In an instant, it was as if the entire world of Azeroth trembled. The entire Mount Hyjal echoed with Archeron's crazy laughter. Ha! All your efforts will be in vain. I am already absorbing the power of the World Tree. Soon, your hearts will stop beating. Chapter 964. Stop him. Malfurion let out a desperate roar. Once the power of the World Tree is absorbed, it will reverse and release, Breath of Destruction. Weaken him, or we won't be able to use our last resort. The great druid didn't have time to explain what Breath of Destruction was, but it didn't sound like anything good. Far away, all the lesser elves on Mount Hyjal and even the surrounding areas were alarmed. Gorgeous light balls began to fly toward the world tree at high speed. Those light balls were the most basic unit of the night elves, lesser elves. They were the craftsmen of the night elves who could help the elves collect wood and other resources. At the same time, they were also the final form of the night elves after their souls returned to the earth. There was no time to investigate the legend of the lesser elves. However, what was certain was that if Archimonde's vitality did not fall below the lower limit, these lesser elves in soul form would only be courting death if they rushed over and self-destructed. They would probably be forced to fall in an instant and then be made into materials for soul retribution. Stop him! Mograine slashed out with Ashbringer for the last time. Then, he knelt down on the ground, panting heavily. For an old soldier who was approaching the age of 60, he was no longer young. Ashbringer, which seemed to be infinitely powerful and could blast the Calamity soldiers into pieces, was a typical holy artifact. However, using such a powerful weapon also required physical strength and mental strength. After squeezing out all the strength in his body, he slashed out a brilliant golden crescent. This golden crescent slashed over, but Archimonde dodged it the moment before it hit. An incomparably thick right leg fell to the ground. However, Archimonde really didn't know what kind of talent he had. He was actually climbing up with 2 arms and 1 leg. Stop him! Turalyon also went all out. Quell, Zerum, burst out with a golden light like the sun, and the long beam of light directly penetrated Archimonde's back from behind, exploded from his chest, and even shot into the trunk of the world tree. It looked like a golden spear had nailed Archimonde to it. However, in just 3 seconds, Archerons continued to climb. His 3 limbs glowed with an evil black light as they clung to the bark of the world tree and began to corrode the green bark of the world tree at a high speed. What was even more frightening was that his severed right leg seemed to have started to grow a new, tender, and much smaller leg. Stop him! Tyrande was sobbing uncontrollably. She ignored her right hand that was bleeding profusely, and continued to draw her bow and shoot arrows mechanically. Every long-range hero that could still attack chased after Archimonde in a frenzy. They desperately poured their firepower into Archimonde's back, who seemed to have lost all sense of pain. Even Gianna and the others had rushed back. But the effect was getting weaker and weaker. It was very simple. Melee professions could not wear heavy armor and climb a world tree that seemed to require at least 1,000 people to hug. After losing the damage from the 2 strongest sacred swords, the entire team's attack power dropped by more than a level. Now, they had almost reached the critical point. Although Archimonde's life force had dropped to a very dangerous level, as long as he absorbed a large amount of the power from the world tree and successfully converted it into dark energy, he would be able to turn the tables. Not only would he be able to kill Duke and the others, but he would also be able to carry out his evil plan and kick all of Azeroth into the abyss of destruction. The tearful Tyrande suddenly remembered that she still had one last sacred sword. She turned her head and stared at Duque. Duque. Anything is fine. I beg you. Thrall realized that his side was starting to lose strength. After the 4th throw of the Hammer of Ruin, there was no hope of taking down Archimonde. He turned around and said, Duque, it's all up to you now. Ronan struggled to get up from the ground and howled. The destruction of Dalajan. Mograine shouted unwillingly. The fall of Lordaeron. Jaina flashed to Duque's side. Her fists were clenched, and her fair skin was red with anger. Duque. The revenge of my father and brother. Servanas stabbed his longbow into the ground and shouted, the revenge of every Quell, Dorii. Thousands of elite warriors who refused to retreat stared at Duque from afar. Thousands of elven souls stared at Duque. Countless forces, every one of them who had thrown themselves in front of the magic mirror, gritted their teeth and cheered for Duque and the rest. They were all staring at Duque. They were waiting. They were looking forward to it. They were sincerely longing for it. They were screaming in their hearts. They prayed that Duke Marcus, who was hailed as Azeroth's greatest hero in the last 1,000 years, for them, for the whole world, would deal a fatal blow to the evil and terrifying existence, the commander of the Burning Legion, Archimonde. The feeling of being watched and looked forward to by billions of creatures made Duque's heart extremely heavy. Duque had long understood that he had to go all out. Only he, who also held a holy sword, could seriously injure Archimonde and create a chance for the elves to self-destruct. However, this could not be done by a clone. After all, a clone was a clone, and its strength could never exceed that of the main body. Someone who could kill Archimonde. The only possibility was for him to do it himself. No one knew what Archimonde's final killing move would be. No one could guarantee what the consequences of killing Archimonde would be. There were only two paths in front of Duque: either he missed the opportunity and became the sinner of all of Azeroth, or he became a hero for 10 seconds. Duque smiled. He smiled casually. That bright and clear smile was aimed at Jaina, at Sylvanas, at every lover who was watching him silently from afar, and at everyone who trusted him and entrusted their last hope to him. "I'm going." There was a soft sound. It was also a sound that seemed as light as a feather. But it made countless women fall in love with him. Duque's figure instantly turned into a stream of light, and when he appeared again, he was already under the tree. Grom, the same calm voice called out, allowing the orc god of war to completely understand what Duke was thinking about. The burly figure was the first to leap onto Kane's totem pole. Kane used the last of his strength to hit Grom high up into the air like a flying ball. That was the highest jump Grom Hellscream had ever made. Chapter 965. An arrow pierced through the clouds, and an army of thousands came to meet. At this moment, Lord Howl was more than an army of thousands. That aura of choosing people to devour. That earth-shattering roar. That blood howl that turned the tide of the battle. All of them were Archimonde's death warrant. In order to deal with the long-range bombardment of the heroes, Axebody's resistance had already switched to a high magic resistance state. Grom's unexpected leap into the air caused Archimonde to panic. Gritting his teeth, Ak roared, "Hand of Death." In theory, the effect of Hand of Death was to kill all targets within 30 meters. Unfortunately, Archimonde was too weak. He had been injured repeatedly, and most of his magic power had been diverted to the protective shield. Hand of Death, which was supposed to kill Grom instantly, landed on his chest with a loud bang. The orc god of war, who had extremely high HP, took the hit head-on. Then, the scarlet long-handled axe drew a dazzling blood-red crescent in the air. The tip of the crescent was Archimonde's neck. Ah! With a scream, blood splattered everywhere. Half of Archimonde's neck was cut off from his body. If he were immortal, he would have died hundreds of times, but he was a great demon of Eridar with extremely strong vitality. Even though the huge wound on his neck was like a fountain, he still didn't die. Scram! A large AoE, air explosion, blasted Grom's body into the ground like a meteor. He crashed into the thick black ground and created a huge crater. At this moment, Duque arrived. A simple long-range flash appeared on Archimonde's broad back. "Farewell." "Archimonde," Duque's shout spread in all directions. "Gone. It's over." There were so many people who covered for Duque's last attack, but Archimonde couldn't find any way to protect himself at the very end. He was in so much despair, so much hatred. If he had 10 more seconds, he could have completed the transformation of the World Tree's power, repaired his body, and won this easy final victory for him. However, it was at this crucial juncture that Duque arrived with the holy sword in hand. The golden light shone brightly, resplendent and glorious, with all the best wishes in the world of Azeroth. It was accompanied by the ethereal singing of holy children singing hymns in unison. Duque extended his left hand forward and pulled his right hand back. Like a drawn bow, he made a stabbing posture. The gears of time seemed to have rusted and solidified at this moment. Archimonde, who was at his wit's end, sent a wisp of divine sense to Duque, "Don't kill me." I only need the power of the world tree. I swear I will not pollute this world. Otherwise, even if I die, I will give you the most terrible curse, polluting your soul so that you will never be able to become divine again. After you die, you will definitely degenerate into the ugliest demon. This was the deepest form of intimidation. It was also a threat that would definitely come true. The mysterious curse of a dying great demon was undoubtedly the most terrifying evil existence. Duque smiled. Archimonde was just stalling for time. How could he not know? He replied with a divine sense, just as I never dare to overestimate the moral integrity of a demon, I will also not underestimate my courage. It turns out, I am also quite a brave person. Although I was forced to at first. With a faint but determined smile, Duque stabbed the unknown holy sword in his hand into Archimonde's head like lightning. What came out of Archimonde's mouth was not only screams, but also a solid curse that was so thick that everyone could see it with the naked eye. If one ignored the black color that made people tremble, this huge curse was as long and magnificent as the Milky Way falling from the sky. Unfortunately, this incomparably illusory curse waterfall symbolized the ultimate evil of the world. It was the most violent destruction. It was the most terrible blasphemy. It was the deepest pollution. It was the strangest distortion. At this moment, everyone who looked at Duque with anticipation suddenly realized that they had forced Duque to make a terrible decision. No, thousands of miles away, Queen Kalia who saw this scene fainted on the spot. Duque, Elucia's eyes were filled with tears. Nearby, Tyron's entire body was trembling, and she suddenly fell from the white tiger. Jaina suddenly felt all the strength in her body being sucked out, and she collapsed to the ground. Servana's face was pale, and he immediately knelt on the charred ground. Seeing this scene, Malfurion no longer felt like taking care of his allies. He raised his vine-like staff high up, and let out a long and complicated roar towards the sky. In the entire world, every little elf received his signal to attack. Hundreds of thousands of little elves drew colorful streams of light in the sky, and they all rushed towards Archimonde. Bang bang bang. Boom boom boom. At first, there was only a series of firecracker-like sounds, but it soon turned into thunder, and then into the continuous roar of tens of thousands of cannons. It was completely unacceptable to people's hearing. Not only hearing, but the terrifying strong light produced by the continuous crazy explosions, and even those who had their backs to the light source could still feel the unbearable strong light. Through the palms and arms that were covering their eyes, the strong light pierced through their muscles and skin, and pierced into their eyeballs. Awe! All kinds of screams. Screams. Painful cries. Endless screams. Every hero's senses were completely messed up. For a long time. For a long time, no one knew how long it had been, Servanas finally opened his eyes. The huge world tree, Nordrassil, was like a lonely guard standing on a lonely land, and the crimson lightning that fell from the clouds outlined its outline. The heroes who had survived the terrible battle looked down at the battlefield that was nearing its end. In all directions, the few troops of various factions were retreating like a tide from the plateau on the top of Mount Hyjal through the teleportation portal. There were not many corpses. Perhaps the most eye-catching corpse was Archimonde, who was nailed to the trunk of the world tree. His huge corpse, which had recovered to its original height of 150 meters, was so eye-catching that it almost occupied the entire vision of the heroes. Accompanied by the crimson fireworks in the sky, looking around at the battlefield that was like a ruin, with debris and broken tiles everywhere, it was like a painting of the end of the world. Duque? Where's Duque? Jaina and Queen Cia exclaimed at the same time. Suddenly, Ronan held a pitch-black body and shouted, "Teacher is here. He's still breathing. Let's leave first. The portal is already starting to become unstable." Chapter 966. Without any explanation, two strong arms picked up the two queens and plunged into the teleportation gate. The next moment, hundreds of miles away, the once huge and lush world tree's crown could be clearly seen shining brightly. After a violent tremor, the entire mountaintop exploded. Then, a terrifying shock wave and dazzling fire swept through the entire Mount Hyjal like a huge wave that could destroy the world. All signs of life were swept away by the wave of destruction at this moment. The night elves who had already taken refuge watched blankly as the home they had lived in for nearly 10,000 years was destroyed in this world-shaking explosion. Woo woo. Woo woo woo. Countless elves knelt on the ground and prayed, wailing loudly. At the same time, in the wizard tower of Theramore Harbor, there was also a loud cry. Damn it! I asked you to see if you could do anything, not to sacrifice yourself. Jaina knelt in front of the bed, tears streaming down her face. Servanas also knelt, his hands clasping the palm of the black figure on the bed. He pursed his lips tightly and did not say a word, his body trembling non-stop. The grief of the two queens was clearly expressed. In order to defeat Archimonde and his main force of the Burning Legion, the Alliance paid a heavy price. At this moment, in Theramore Harbor, almost every piece of green grass was neatly placed with corpses. Those who slept here were the familiar faces of the living who stood where they were in the past. Although each of them had written their wills and were prepared to accept their sacrifice before coming here, and this battle had ended in victory as well, proving that all their previous efforts were absolutely meaningful. But compared to such a victory, they would rather die in battle with their companions on Mount Hyjal, and not taste the suffocating despair that came from the Mage Tower. In order to kill Archimonde, the commander of the Burning Legion, their most respected hero of the Alliance, Duke Marcus, also suffered the most terrifying backlash when he killed this super big demon. An unknown and terrifying death curse had filled his entire body with the most evil and dark power. Since the invasion of the orcs, they did not enjoy many years of peace, and the Burning Legion also came. Everyone said that the test for Azeroth was yet to come. If they lost a powerful leader like Duque at this time, no one knew what would happen next. Would the Alliance disband? Would the world come to the brink of destruction? All of the soldiers experienced the feeling of fear, worry, and helplessness towards the future after victory. It was as if they harbored a thirst for military achievements and hope in life, but were immediately seriously injured and on the verge of death as soon as they stepped onto the battlefield. They had no choice but to face the cruel reality of having their dreams shattered. It was a terrifying feeling as if all future prospects were about to be destroyed. On top of the Mage Tower, Turalian, who was holding Quell Zerum tightly, had tears streaming down his face. Similarly, Mograine, who was holding Ashbringer by the window, had a similar expression on his face. As comrades who had worked with Duque for more than a decade, they knew better than anyone else how important Duque was in pushing the Alliance forward. Not to mention that Duque had a close relationship with the three queens. In the current alliance, apart from Magni, there was not a single king from the previous generation left. In this political arena where political capital and achievements were the most important, there was no one who could replace Duque, not even temporarily. If they lost Duque here, it would definitely be a heavy blow to the alliance's politics, economy, and military. It might be better if Duque died in battle, but what they feared the most was that Duque would fall like Prince Arthas. That would be the nightmare of the Alliance and even the entire world of Azeroth. A leader who understood the Alliance and even the Horde the best, who had wisdom far above others, had fallen into the Burning Legion's sharpest claws. Just thinking about it made Turalian and Magni shiver. Looking at Duque, who was entangled by the dark aura and his body twitching, Jaina's tear-stained face looked as if she had been stabbed. She turned her head and questioned Benedict, Riadaline, and all the clerics, "Can't you do anything to find a way to get rid of the dark power in Duque's body?" None of the clerics dared to respond to Queen Kurtiraz's anger immediately. At this time, Queen Sylvanas pressed the back of Jaina's hand with one hand. "Enough. Didn't they say it before? It's useless to blame them. Duque's magic circuit is too fragile. This is the result of suddenly being invaded by dark power when Duque used up his magic power. Forcibly injecting external holy light will only cause every inch of Duque's magic circuit to collapse and explode. Could it be Could it be? Jaina was about to lose control of her emotions. Are we just going to watch Duque die like this? Only silence answered her. At this time, Vanessa suddenly knocked on the door. Her face was also tear-stained. Several representatives of the Horde are outside Theramore. They want to see Master Marcus. Jaina was completely out of control. What are those cruel orcs doing here at this time? Do they want to see if Duque is dead, and then take the opportunity to defeat the Alliance? Mograine gently pressed on Jaina's shoulder and shook his head. My old brother Theon once said, I've seen the dirtiest humans, but I've also seen the greatest orcs. So, glory has no borders. Jaina fell silent. Turalyon nodded to Vanessa. Let them come up. Not long after, Thrall, Grom, Wajin, Kane, and several other Horde leaders came up. Kane was too big, so he could only stay under the mage tower. The other three came up, holding a bouquet of flowers. Although the flowers did not match the burly and violent appearance of the orcs, everyone still felt a trace of warmth. Thrall spoke directly in the standard human language. I know that we may not be welcome. But this time, we have nothing to do with our position. It is purely to express our respect for a great hero. Perhaps one day, the Alliance and the Horde will go to war again. Even so, I hope to see a healthy and powerful Duke Marcus on the battlefield, rather than hiding in a dark corner and rejoicing that a strong enemy has left. Thrall was so open and aboveboard that several paladins silently bowed slightly to Thrall to show their respect. Sylvanas and Jaina stood up together and also bowed to Thrall. Finally, it was Queen Sylvanas who spoke. Thank you for your visit. This cooperation between the Alliance, the Horde, and the Night Elves was single-handedly facilitated by Duque on the Alliance's side. We also hope that we can finish what we started. Before there are new developments, we hope to maintain a state of peace with the Horde. Chapter 967. Duque felt very uncomfortable. His entire body was holding on. That terrible feeling was like forcing an ordinary person who liked to eat vegetarian food to participate in a eating contest and make him swallow 100 hot dogs in one go. What was worse was that it was an expired hot dog. The dark forces kept tearing at Duque's soul. They used all kinds of words and all kinds of scenes to tempt Duque. Destroy. Destroy. Destroy everything that you don't like. Possess. Seize. Occupy everything that you like the most. Countless thoughts attacked Duque's soul. They forced Duque to vent again and again, to release the negative emotions in the depths of his soul. Normally, if Duque was an ordinary native of Azeroth, unless he was a saint like Uther, he would have fallen long ago. Because the terrifying curse forced Duque to destroy 100 worlds, 1,000 castles, and occupy 10,000 beauties. Fortunately, transmigrators had their own way of releasing pressure. It was a unique virtual space in Azeroth. Ha ha ha. I'm the master of my world. Duque laughed loudly as he created 100 worlds in SimCity. Then, he summoned natural disasters, either flooding or burning them, destroying the 100 worlds. Just castles, be destroyed under my iron hooves. Duque laughed maniacally as he wantonly raided houses in Exile Conan, destroying the 1,000 castles that foreigners had painstakingly built. Teachers. Submit to Duque's godly sword. Wahahaha. Duque laughed sinisterly as he immersed himself in the 10-terabyte action movies that he had watched before. He wreaked havoc and fought with the teachers over and over again. After completing all the requirements, Duque suddenly woke up. His head was very heavy. His eyelids were very heavy. Even so, Duque still felt that his hands were tightly held by a pair of warm and soft hands. He's awake. He's really awake. Everyone, be careful. The surroundings were in a state of chaos. Duque slowly opened his eyelids and saw two beautiful faces with tears in their eyes. Then, the rest of the passers-by like Turalyon and Thrall were all ignored by Duque. F***ck. I actually changed from a European commander to an African chief. Duque said something that no one understood the moment he opened his mouth. Duque didn't expect anyone to understand his self-deprecating way of saying that he had fallen from a lucky star to an unlucky ghost. But I don't feel comfortable if I don't complain. For some reason, Duque's strange way of speaking made the holy knights at the side heave a sigh of relief. Holy light above, Duque, I truly admire you. You've been corrupted by the power of darkness, yet you're still able to maintain your consciousness. Mograine placed the large Ashbringer beside his hand. Turalyon, on the other hand, was in a dilemma. His rationality told him to remain vigilant. After all, the fall could happen in an instant. Perhaps the fallen Duque still retained his cunning, and this was purely to numb people. What was interesting was that apart from him, everyone chose to believe that Duque had survived. Even the leaders of the tribe heaved a long sigh of relief. What? Duque is awake. Cain, who was more than 4 meters tall and had a huge body, actually shamelessly climbed up the stairs to the highest floor of the mage tower when he heard the commotion. He stuck half his head out of the door and kept looking. Duque, are you all right? The tear ducts of the 2 queens were too developed. Their tears flowed endlessly like a broken dam. How can I be all right? Wait a moment, let me see if I can examine myself. Duque sighed and summoned the system elf. Hey, system elf, if you're not dead, let out a grunt. Humph. Duque was speechless. Help me examine my body, host, I've already finished my examination. You're currently in a shadow form that can't be switched. Huh? Wait. Wasn't I cursed? If you're talking about Archimonde's curse before he died, then it should be a very high priority and compulsive mental suggestion. By asking you to complete a specified depravity event, it will cause your mind to naturally distort. However, you've already completed all the compulsive requirements with the virtual reality simulation. Now, according to my assessment, your mental health is at 60%. Ah, so I've lost 40%. Duque secretly sighed. No, host, you've only lost 15% of your mental health because of the curse. By the way, before you came to Azeroth, the host's mental health index was 55%. Ha! Wait. Something's wrong. Duque wanted to shut the system elf up, but it was too late. Before the host came to Azeroth, you were just a young man who failed many subjects and almost had to repeat a year in his first year. Then, your heart was filled with dissatisfaction with the status quo and a strong desire for the opposite sex. After you came to Azeroth, as the host's social status increased and you received love from the opposite sex, your mental health index peaked at 80%. Host, your mental health peaked at 80%. Before today's battle, it was 75%. It's dirty. Shut up. Duque's face darkened. Alright, he was completely black now, so he couldn't tell. The system elf obediently fell silent. After a while, Duque said, tell me the possible solution. The next moment, Duque's consciousness returned to reality. Duque said slowly, where's my holy sword? Here. Vanessa hurriedly handed over the slender holy sword. Looking at the once unknown holy sword, Duque was suddenly speechless. For some reason, most divine weapons in Azeroth had long, human-like names, such as Azeroth's dual blades, or Atish, the legendary staff of the Guardian. He had always been vexed. Why didn't his divine weapon have a name? Only later did he realize that divine weapons had to awaken their true names. According to the system elf, when you truly merged with the will of the divine weapon, the most realistic image in your mind and that name would automatically become the name of the new divine weapon. In the end, what did Duke, who had a sword in one hand and a staff in the other, think of when he killed Ak? Once upon a time, in the epic fantasy movie The Lord of the Rings, there was a powerful mage who did not know any spells at all. He only had the illuminating spell, and the rest of his talents were all dual wield, berserk, and other messy talent skills. He also held a staff in his left hand and a sword in his right, sweeping through thousands of orcs without panting. That's right, he was the famous white-robed sword sage, Gandalf. In the end, the moment Duque killed Archimonde, he thought of Mr. Dry Tofu. Alright, something had happened. Duque picked up the slender holy sword sage, and there were a few words written on it. Gandalf, the legendary sword of the white-robed sword sage. Duque almost spat out a mouthful of ketchup. Chapter 968. This was not the first time Duque had wanted to change the name of his one and only divine weapon. In the end, this damned holy sword was like dried tofu, smelly and hard. It only recognized itself as dried tofu and ignored everything else. Alright, Duque gave in. If worst comes to worst, I'll just find a better divine weapon in the future and replace you. In the next second, when Duque silently recited the full name of the holy sword, everyone suddenly discovered that the long blade had turned into a translucent illusory form. This is... Servana's tear-stained face was full of astonishment. I have to do my best. I believe that light and darkness can be changed in this world. Since Arthas was able to fall from a glorious holy knight to the most evil death knight, I believe that I can also overcome the power of darkness in my body and change myself back to the side of light. Duque's sonorous and forceful words caused everyone in the room to freeze in shock and admiration. Duque faced the left. Turalyon, I know that you are the most rational of all of us. Now, I need you to be rational. So, please place, Quell, Zerum, on my neck. If things go wrong, you can chop off my head. Turalyon's facial muscles kept twitching and trembling. He really wanted to curse at Duque for giving him such a cruel task. Even if they were once the best of comrades and friends, Turalyon still felt a deep pain when he had to personally play the double role of monitor and executioner. In the end, thousands of words turned into an incomparably heavy nod. Yes. On the other side, Servanas gently took out a dagger that she always carried with her. She placed the sharp blade against her throat. Duque, if you fail, I'll accompany you. I accompany you. These 3 words sounded soft, but they contained a deep love. Everyone in the room was visibly moved by his words. Without needing to say anything, Jaina condensed a similarly sharp icicle and calmly pressed it against her own throat. The 2 queens calmly smiled at Duque. The breeze that blew in from the window made their golden hair flutter, as if saying that as long as Duque could not turn the light in his body into the same color as their hair, then tragedy would be the only ending. Please move back to the wall. Everyone did as they were told. Everyone's gaze froze, and even their hearts seemed to have stopped beating. Everyone held their breath and watched as Duque smiled faintly as he pierced his own chest with the divine sword, whose blade had already turned completely illusory. There was no splatter of blood. However, there was an even more intense reaction. It was like a drop of water in a pot of boiling oil. In an instant, Duque's entire body was boiling. What unfolded before the eyes of the powerhouses was definitely a wondrous scene. Duque's entire body seemed to have turned into a large fountain cluster. Countless dark forces, as black as ink, spurted out from the corners of Duque's eyes, nostrils, mouth, ear holes, and even the pores on his skin. However, each long line of black liquid was illusory and translucent. Even though the evil aura on it could be felt from a distance, this evil power did not dissipate in midair and pollute the surrounding air. Instead, like a spring, it stretched to its limit and automatically shrank back into Duque's body. Duque's mind was clear. He also knew that what he was about to do sounded ridiculous, but it was not without foundation. In terms of battle history, the original, Ashbringer, was filled with a legendary aura. It was first Mogaine's weapon, then as Mogaine was tricked by his son, the Ashbringer, also followed Mogaine's soul and became the fallen Ashbringer. Finally, it jumped back to the side of light and became Tyrion Fordring's killing weapon, killing the Lich King Arthas. In terms of professions, there were also holy priests and shadow priests who could switch talents at will. On a larger scale, including planet Azeroth, the multiverse was made up of light and darkness. Therefore, light and darkness were only relative existences, there was no absolute boundary. Duque's mysterious and strange prayer echoed throughout the room. Light originates from darkness, and light emerges from darkness. Light originates from darkness, and light emerges from darkness. It was repeated over and over again, like an infinite brainwashing cycle. Duque's performance, which was like a conman's, caused every witness to be dumbstruck and unable to control themselves. Yes, this was the incantation, or line, chanted in the movie when Khadgar defeated Old Max and reversed the corrupted Karazhan energy pool in order to save the world. Strictly speaking, this was not a real incantation. Remember, the power of holy light and the power of darkness were classic idealistic powers. Regardless of whether others believed it or not, he believed it. That was enough. Just like the brainwashing song Little Apple, it was not pleasant at first, but after listening to it for a while, not only did it sound good, but it also made him feel that he really did not need to take his medicine today, and he felt cute. That was how Duque hypnotized himself. Now it seemed to be a little useful. The power of darkness around him was still roiling endlessly. But at this moment, anyone could be surprised to find that the condensed power of darkness seemed to be rolling slower and slower. Then, the ink-like black seemed to be impure. It was mixed with a lot of strange light. At first, it seemed to be dark gray, but gradually, some people saw light gray, light white, pure white, and finally, there was a faint golden light, like a dancing golden snake in the thick ink. The two queens, who had been holding a sharp blade to their throats, began to tremble involuntarily. They could not believe their eyes. Clang. Queen Sylvie's dagger fell to the ground. The icicle in Jaina's hand also fell to the ground after losing the support of magic, turning into ice shards that no longer had any special meaning. In the room, every woman covered their mouth with their hands, afraid that they would scream and startle Duque, interrupting this epoch-making process of whitewashing. Thrall and the others widened their eyes, and their eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. Not only did Old Bull widen his eyes, but even his nostrils rapidly expanded, and he panted heavily. Ronan was the smartest. Even though he was as excited as the others, he did not forget his original intention, and quickly put up a protective barrier, trying to block the outside world as much as possible. The golden light increased, and became more and more intense. After a short 10 breaths, the golden light suddenly shone, and even outside the mage tower, a huge golden pillar of light shot into the sky. A golden Duque that seemed to be made of pure gold appeared in front of all the experts. Chapter 969. Turalian had long withdrawn the sword. Quell, Zarum, would never be able to deal with a truly virtuous person. If he dared to use such a holy sword to slash a saint, he would have to wait for the sword to shatter a second time. Thrall opened his mouth so wide that a cantaloupe could be stuffed inside. Grom's unscrupulous mouth even accidentally dripped saliva. It couldn't be helped. The beastman's fangs were too long, and it was easy for saliva to drip out. But no one was offended, because most of them were just as unsightly. Vanessa was crying so hard that she looked like a cat with snot running out of her nose. Servanas and Jaina had unknowingly hugged each other. Their beautiful faces were tightly pressed together, and their tears were flowing together. It was impossible to tell whose tears they belonged to. In any case, all four eyes were fixed in Duke's direction, and they did not even blink, unwilling to miss out on any changes in the slightest. Even in the face of strong light, only Jaina used magic to create 2 black lenses in front of her eyes. When the dazzling golden light gradually faded, Duque pulled out the illusory holy sword from his chest again. His body turned from a 1000-watt light bulb to the color of a normal person. At this time, almost all the powerhouses present heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed that Duque had escaped the fall. Duque, are you all right? The 2 queens asked in unison as they stretched out their hands. For jade-like hands seemed to be caressing Duque's body wantonly. It was as if they wanted to see if a certain part of Duque's body had demonized. Duque smiled bitterly and sighed. Generally. I'm fine. This time, a long sigh of relief rang out in the large room. Congratulations. Duque. I knew you could create miracles. If not for the two more noble queens in front, Mograine would have rushed up to give Duque a bear hug. If possible, tell me how you returned from the darkness to the light. Actually. Duque didn't seem to know how to start, but he still chose to say it directly. Alexandros, after all, that is the power of Archimonde, the commander of the Burning Legion. It's not that easy to get rid of. This. Mograine was stunned. Everyone's hearts were in their throats again. Duque sighed. I'd better demonstrate it for you. After saying that, Duque's palm glowed with a holy light. Benedict was stunned. Is this a healing spell? That's right. That's right. It was a healing spell. Although it was a low-level healing spell, Duque managed to cast a low-level healing spell in the next second. The holy radiance shone on Jaina's finger, and the long wound that was scratched by the sharp icicle began to heal at a speed visible to the naked eye. That's impossible. Duque, aren't you a mage? Kale, that was a little confused. Duque didn't say anything. This time, he turned to cast his spell on Turalyon. This was a more advanced, quick heal spell. The holy light fell on Turalyon's head, and he could clearly feel that it was the purest holy light. He just didn't know why the holy light was golden in the air, but it turned green when it reached his head. Well, don't worry about these details. Everyone's attention fell on Duque. Near the gate, Mograine's adopted daughter, Sally Whitemane, had her hands crossed in front of her chest. She was a little excited and a little confused as she asked, Lord Marcus has become a holy priest. Duque smiled bitterly. If only it were that simple. What I'm going to do next is controllable. Please don't get excited, and don't cut me. Ah. Someone swallowed. Duque transformed magnificently. In less than half a second, the holy radiance surrounding him faded away, turning into a dark color as deep as the night. At this moment, Duque became the first shadow priest in the history of Azeroth, or shadow priest for short. What he used was the shadow form of a shadow priest, which could increase shadow damage and weaken the physical damage he received. Duque, this is... Turalyon was also stunned. Just like 15 years ago, when the profession of warlock was first introduced to Azeroth. 10 years ago, many Dalajan wizards who couldn't continue on the path of wizards turned to warlocks who used dark power. I seem to have opened up a new talent for priests, Shadow. Turalyon's face was full of embarrassment. How about it? Do you want to try the attack of a shadow priest? I'll be gentle. Curiosity killed the cat. Turalyon seemed calm and rational, but he was also a curious and sharp person. Just like that, he held up his shield, and his body burst with holy light. He said in a deep voice, I'm ready. Duque slowly raised his arm, stretched out his index finger, and spat out 4 words. Mental lash. Since it was a mental attack, it naturally had nothing to do with physical defense. Similarly, it was not a direct dark power. The damage that came from the soul almost made Turalyon jump in pain. Ouch! Stop! Stop now! Duque smiled and stopped. Then, under everyone's gaze, he changed his talent again and became a holy priest. The crowd was speechless. Alright, now I have light and darkness coexisting in my body. Although the light is the absolute majority, I can't guarantee that I won't fall or something in the future. So, I'll take this opportunity to resign from the position of Alliance Commander. This is a good thing for me and the Alliance. The leaders of the Alliance instinctively wanted to persuade Duque not to do this, but after thinking about it carefully, they found that this was the best result. Before figuring out what a shadow priest was, no king would be at ease to hand over their army to a strong person who could use dark power, even if that person's name was Duke Marcus. The words that were about to come out of their mouths were all stuck in their throats. Only Jaina had a faint smile on her lips. Duque wasn't going to die in battle or fall completely. Even if he removed this title, would his influence on the Alliance fade? What a joke. One vote from each of the three queens was enough to influence any major decision in the alliance. From Jaina's point of view, Duque's move to advance by retreating was extremely beautiful. Moreover, Duque had suffered because he wanted to kill Archimonde. If the hero who saved the world would be persecuted because of this, then there was no point in staying in the alliance. If anyone dared to force Duque, Jaina was willing to bet that Courtiras, Sind Dorii, and Rotterdam would definitely withdraw from the alliance. Everyone was relieved that Duque was fine. At this moment, Duque smirked. Then, is it time to split the spoils of war? Chapter 970. Gianna elegantly took out 2 clean handkerchiefs and handed one to Servanas. She used the other to wipe away the tears on her face. Sigh. Natural beauties were truly amazing. If she were a so-called internet celebrity from the previous dynasty, she would have become a ghost with a mess of foundation and makeup oil on her face. After wiping her face, Gianna was that flirtatious beauty again. Yes, Duque, are you going to share the spoils with us as a mage or a priest? Duque rolled his eyes at Gianna, a little speechless. Once she recovered, Gianna was back to being a smart and capable woman. Damn it. It would have been better if you didn't say it. Now that you've said it, how can I take the mage equipment and then the priest equipment? No. I'll spank the girls who don't listen later. Duque, who had almost fallen into depravity, said righteously, I can clearly feel that my magic circuit is still functioning normally. Deep down, I'm still a mage, and I think I'll definitely recover in the future. But now that holy power has completely dominated my body, I instinctively reject all elements other than holy light. So, I'll count myself as a priest for now. Duque voluntarily gave up his position as a mage, and Caponia could be seen secretly sighing in relief. There were so many strong people gathered this time, but the problem was that the classes of the strong people were quite clustered. Most of them were mages and warriors, but there was only one priest, Benedictus. There were 6 mages, and Duque, who was supposed to be the #1 hero and commander, was definitely going to take the best part of the pharaoh. Now, Duque suddenly jumped to the side of the few priests. This was definitely good news for the pharaoh. Unfortunately, Caponia's joy only lasted for a second, because she immediately realized that most heroes actually didn't care about this. That's right. Most heroes are just trying to save the world itself. Take Ronan for example. After the battle at Mount Hyjal, every mage looked at him differently. The old Ronan would always be the student of Marcus. The current Ronan was, without a doubt, the Arcana Master Ronan. Another example was her master, Kale, that's. Now that he had been cleansed of his reputation as a traitor and a despicable person, he could see former High Elves saluting Kale, that's wherever he went. This change in status was a rare treasure that no amount of top-grade equipment could exchange for. Therefore, the spoils of war were only incidental. Of course, in this era where epic equipment had yet to appear in large numbers, everyone was happy to see such a large amount of high-quality equipment suddenly appear. Mograine said, I know you're more concerned about this, Duke. The moment Archimonde was killed, I happened to grab the dimensional bag that fell out of his body while I was below him. Turalian continued, Her Excellency Tyrant Whisperwind was busy clearing up the battlefield and taking care of the aftermath. She had said to thank everyone for their support and that the Night Elves would not participate in the distribution of the spoils of war. However, there were 3 s among the spoils of war. We only had 2 rangers, so we gave one to Sir Whisperwind. The rest of the spoils of war are here. Turalian opened the dimensional bag and filled half the room with all kinds of shiny top-grade equipment. This time, even Duque was a little surprised. He had never thought that Archimonde would have a mode of equipment explosion. Many of the equipment were not unique as he had imagined, but more like standard equipment. For example, the Windrunner sisters were not only playing with a flash bow, but also a feverish pursuit chainmail. Grom and Kane were also given a boundless fury leg armor, and the 2 macho men were overjoyed. Sar touched the blade of Cataclysm, which had a yellow base and a straight 2-handed sword, and laughed. Oh, Brock always complains that he doesn't have a suitable weapon. He'll be able to use this when his arm recovers. Originally, a small exquisite weapon like the Blade of Cataclysm would not have been given to Brock. After all, he was only Sar's guard. However, a bunch of close combat macho men were all tycoons when it came to weapons. The two paladins had divine weapons, but Sar and Grom each had their own special weapons. Old Cow liked totem poles, so Brock could only take advantage of it. Moreover, the warrior equipment was basically distributed among the Horde members, so there would be no conflict. The competition among the mages was the fiercest. After Duque's withdrawal and Kale, that's lack of desire, the remaining four became extremely humble. In the end, Ronan was the biggest winner in the war. He obtained the one-handed magic sword, Chaotic Storm, that countless mage players had begged their grandfathers and mothers to get. Because he did not have a good secondary weapon, he almost wanted the Staff of Purification that priests loved, but Duque could not stand it and gave Ronan the secondary magic book, Chronicles of Dark Secrets, that he got from Raki Winterfrost. There was also a gorgeous robe that was pure black with purple and gold edges. Although everyone found out that it was an unknown robe after appraisal, and they wanted to name it Duque's robe, Duque blushed. Ever since he had blessed Ronan with holy light and found out that the holy light above Ronan's head was also green, Duque had guiltily, very humbly, given the right to name it. Ronan's robe, no problem. He waved his hand and generously gave the robe to Ronan. Seeing that Jaina was staring at Ronan's luxurious outfit, Duke had no choice but to give Jaina another set since he had two, Chaotic Storm, sets. After giving a few pieces of magic equipment to Caponia and Solarian, Duque also got himself a staff called Argus Apostle. This staff was a little imperfect in terms of attributes. It mainly increased endurance, spirit, and spell power, but did not increase intelligence. Fortunately, Duque's Breaking Dawn mage attributes were preserved. His intelligence was frighteningly high, and he did not care about this. Since he could only be a priest for now, his original, Obsidian Queen, and dried tofu, could not be used for the time being. He could only make do with this staff. Fortunately, the staff's appearance was very attractive. The body of the staff was a golden double-headed staff with a brown cross tied to it. It looked luxurious and imposing after the staff was bound to the hands. The two heads of the staff were also very special. Embedded on the body of the staff were two transparent rectangular crystal ornaments, not two heads of the staff. In the middle of the long crystal frame, there were 3 blue runes on each head. The mysterious magic runes on them shone brightly. This style. This is high-end and grand. Duque suddenly felt that it was quite cool to be a priest. Chapter 971. Duque was very kind. Except for the times when he was not kind, he was very kind. There was nothing wrong with that. When Archimonde dropped 4 sets of Forgotten Protector's helmet, Sal's eyes were a little sad. Now, even a fool would know that this thing should be the same set as the previous gloves. Of course, the Horde wouldn't know what the effect of the set was. It was just that the Alliance had already forged the Forgotten Protector's gloves, and it was impossible to reforge it again. Since Archimonde had one, shouldn't they give it to him? At this time, the Alliance and the Horde were in a honeymoon period. Moreover, when they heard that there were more than 100,000 demons and more than 300,000 undead army in Fellwood Forest, the Night Elves and the Horde were very annoyed. Firstly, both sides needed help from the Alliance because the Alliance was the only one with extra troops. In fact, Duque already had a second reinforcement plan. Those who went to the Mount Hyjal defense line were the most elite troops. Now that Arkharron was dead, the ordinary army of the Alliance could take care of the leaderless but powerful remnants of the army. Secondly, Sal was still too inexperienced. Duque's face was full of holy brilliance, and he lied sincerely, sigh. I really didn't know that this thing would be the same set as Asgalar's. I even deliberately made 4 hunters' gloves in advance. Looking at the other 2, Gronk Wanderer's gloves, that Duque took out, Sal could only sigh. It almost made the system elf want to remind Sal, hey, don't be fooled by this guy's righteous appearance. In fact, this guy was a shadow priest who sneaked into the priest team. He was the biggest liar of the Holy Church. In fact, Jaina saw through Duque's little thoughts. The problem was that Jaina in this life was no longer the Virgin Mary who crossed camps. She was a firm anti-orc. Duque only cheated Sal a little, and Jaina thought that Duque was too kind. The final result was that due to Duque's operation, a total of 12 sets of the Forgotten series of two-piece sets belonged to the Alliance. The Forgotten Protector series belonged to the four Windrunner sisters. The Forgotten Conqueror was divided among Turalian, Mograine, Riataline, and the priest, Duque. Because Jaina had Smoke Gloves and Chaotic Storm, she chose to give it up. As a result, Ronan, Kale, that's Caponia, and Solarian each got a set of Forgotten Victors. Including the sets, on average, each hero got at least 5 pieces of epic equipment that could only be obtained in the Cavern of Time after 15 years. Because the spoils of war this time were so plentiful and Duke's contributions were too great, a large amount of equipment that the participating heroes didn't need were all distributed to Duke for him to use. This was Duke's sacrifice for the world, forcing him from being the world's #1 mage to become a priest as compensation. The items that seemed messy were actually all high-quality goods. The epic jewelry blueprints were all taken by Duque. The key was that there were no thieves, shamans, or warlocks among the heroes. The only druid was given up. The warlock's equipment could be digested by a mage, but the shaman, thief, and druid's equipment were all in Duque's hands. After the loot was divided, everyone dispersed to give Duque some space to rest. Looking at the excellent equipment that still filled half of the room, Duque sighed. Vanessa, there's a lot of equipment here. Even if you can't use them, you should pick a few. You can use them when you break through to the realm of heroes. Thank you, Master. Vanessa smiled and pulled the bow on the back of the maid uniform in front of Duque. In the next second, the black and white maid uniform was tossed into the air and floated down. Duque was dumbfounded. The reason was, of course, not because Vanessa's maid uniform was empty or anything like that. Instead, it was because Vanessa, who was wearing a set of thin leather tights, walked gracefully to the table that was covered with equipment, and put on the thief equipment dropped by the 6 bosses of Mount Hyjal one by one. Black feather boots, secret merchant's pants, Agato's belt, midnight breastplate, and lethal bracers. After Vanessa put on the 5 pieces of Mount Hyjal equipment that could make 99% of the thieves in the world go crazy, she picked up the maid uniform again and put it on. When she lifted the skirt of the maid uniform again and tied the 2 high-tier epic daggers, Endless Pain, and Tracking Dagger, to her thighs, everything was hidden under the seemingly traditional maid uniform. As if she was worried about the reverse ring, that added hit, critical hit, and attack strength, Vanessa took out a string and threaded it. She then put it into her not-so-deep trench and smiled in satisfaction. Duque was dumbfounded for a long time. In the real world of Azeroth, there were no strict requirements for equipment levels. At most, it was just a matter of how much power the user could bring out. Generally speaking, as long as a physical profession stepped into the realm of heroes, most epic equipment could be used. The simplest indicator was whether the equipment would emit a specific light when it was worn for the first time. For example, excellent was green, excellent was blue, and epic was naturally purple. When Vanessa put on the high-tier epic equipment of Mount Hyjal just now, it emitted an incomparably noble and elegant violet color, which meant that she could completely use the equipment. As if he had lost control after a stroke, Duque extended his right index finger shakily. Vanessa, when did you break into the realm of heroes? Vanessa smiled like a flower and twirled the hem of the maid uniform with her fingers. She gave a maid's bow. Oh, my dear Master Marcus, it's been 5 years. Duque was dumbfounded. It was clear that he was saying, why didn't I know? Why didn't you tell me? I'm sorry, my master. I didn't mean to hide it from you, but the profession of thief relies too much on equipment. Without a pair of good weapons, I can't even easily deal with an elite-level demon guard. Although I also know that you need combat power to besiege Archimonde. Unfortunately, as far as I know, you usually don't have any thief equipment collection, Master. So you hid it from me? Duque was speechless. Yes. I, who lacked the support of equipment, couldn't use it at all even though my skills were far superior to my father's, so I kept quiet. If Master sees this as me being disloyal to you, please punish me as you wish. Vanessa knelt down in front of Duke after saying that. Chapter 972. Duque was really annoyed. He really couldn't blame Vanessa. Physical professions relied on weapons the most. A rookie with a godly weapon in his hand, or a veteran with a stupid white weapon. Whose attack was higher? Ignoring the fact that he was courting death, the rookie could beat the old bird 100 times over in terms of attack. Moreover, when Duque had cleared out Karazhan in the early years, he had given all the equipment to her father, Edwin Van Cleef. Although the epic equipment of Azeroth did not need to be distributed on the spot, the problem was that once it reached epic level, it would be bound to the soul. It could not be transferred at all. Considering that there were too many melee combatants against Archimonde, it would be too easy for Air Blast to harm old Cao Cain, so Duque did not let Edwin come at all. This was a bit dramatic. Duque sighed. Alright, get up. I've never intended to blame you for this. Vanessa quickly got up, a victorious smile on her face. Alright, my beloved master. From today onwards, I can be anyone to you, your most loyal maid, your dagger in the dark. At this point, Vanessa suddenly changed the topic. Or your clearest eyes and ears. Oh, I'll go open the door. It should be your spoils of war delivered to your door. Spoils of war. Delivered to my door. Did Azeroth also have express delivery? Duque was dumbfounded. Vanessa's upper body did not move, but her lower body seemed to have activated sprint, and she floated out of the room at high speed. What the hell was this? The surroundings suddenly fell silent. The Wizard Tower was not just a lair for mages, but also a place for mages to conduct experiments. Soundproofing magic was a must. Thanks to the good soundproofing of the Wizard Tower, the noise outside could not affect this place at all. Duque found himself tired. He had fought with Archimonde for most of the day, and then he was hit. Then he woke up and adjusted his body, and then there was the spoils of war. Unknowingly, it was already midnight. It was time to rest. Looking at the empty room, other than a cabinet, a full-length mirror, a small table, and a bed, there was no other furniture. Duque suddenly felt that this guest room was terrible enough. Come on. Forget it, let's sleep. Duque had just fallen asleep when he felt the fluctuation of magical teleportation. He jumped up in fright. What the hell was this? A second later, a graceful female figure appeared in front of Duque. Jaina. Why? In the middle of the night, Jaina suddenly appeared in front of his bed in a pink robe that looked like the quicksand robe, wearing a one-piece nightgown that was more than 50% transparent and barely covered her body. Duque stared at the faintly discernible seductive figure. His eyes widened, and he felt his mouth go dry. Why are you here? Duque asked dumbly. Why? Jaina let out a pleasant chuckle. Duque, this is my wizard tower, and this is my bedroom. Do I need a special reason to appear here? Duque slapped his forehead. God, I've been using my left hand too much lately. I've really become a retard. Every inch of a Magus tower was like a golden ruler. Every inch of space that was expanded would require an astronomical amount of investment in terms of defense and functionality. In particular, Theramore was newly built. With Duque's life in danger, it was impossible to have a space in the wizard tower that was both safe and wouldn't affect the extra guest rooms outside. Only Jaina's bedroom could be of this level. But, even if simplicity was beauty, wasn't Jaina, as Queen Kurtira's, too plain? The clever Jaina easily saw through Duque's doubts. Why, I remember that you've never liked luxury. Is there a problem with my bedroom being so simple? No. Not a problem. Seeing Duke's eyes flickering, he hurriedly got out of bed. Jaina also picked up the quilt that Duke had just used, pulled it over, and lay down on her side, with her back to Duke. Duke was a little confused. He didn't know what Jaina was up to. The air fell into a strange silence. Suddenly, Jaina's faint sigh came from the dark room. Sigh, the voice was so plaintive that it made Duke feel as if his heart was breaking. Jaina's clear and gentle voice sounded. 13 years ago, there was a little princess who was told by her father that she was going to marry the greatest hero in the world, but for the time being, she could only stay by the hero's side in the name of his disciple. She came to a strange place with longing, learning everything she thought she should learn. Days passed, and the little princess grew up day by day. She soon discovered that the man who was supposed to be her husband didn't love her, and even had a faint sense of disgust and avoidance. She didn't know what she had done wrong, but she thought that since this was her unchangeable fate, as long as she didn't want to spend the rest of her life in tragedy, she had to learn to change herself, and let herself become the person he liked. The little princess's efforts were never effective. Every time they met, she felt that there was an invisible wall between her and the man who was supposed to be her husband. She could only sigh at the invisible wall day after day. Suddenly, one day, the hero disappeared in front of the world in order to protect the world. And the princess, who was starting to grow up, became his nominal widow. 10 years passed, and he appeared again when the world was in danger of destruction. He led a group of heroes to defeat the evil demon commander. Not only did he avenge her, but he also became a hero in the eyes of the world again. But the princess, who was no longer young, didn't even have the right to stand by his side. Maybe it was because he really hated her. Or maybe it was because human women can never maintain their beauty for thousands of years like the elves, who have a lifespan of tens of thousands of years. At this point, Jaina's sorrowful voice came to an abrupt stop. The air fell into a dead silence. After a long time, Jaina turned around, and under the flickering firelight, there were clear traces of tears. Duke, I don't know if my relationship with you has improved recently, but if it is, please tell me the reason why you hate me. If so, please tell me the reason why you hate me. The state guest house is about 100 yards to the left of the Magus Tower. If it wasn't for... Before Jaina could finish, her mouth was already sealed. A few seconds later, Duke smiled. This was for him, and also for Jaina. Fate had completely changed. Forcing the terrible Jaina from his previous life onto the Jaina who was willing to die with him in this life was simply stupid and blasphemous. Looking at Jaina, who was almost crazy with joy, Duke revealed a naughty smile. Come, let teacher Do teach you what the flow of magic in the ORZ position looks like. Chapter 973. What in the world was ORZ frustrated front bend? Jaina didn't understand. But she was a very studious and smart student. When she saw Duke use his finger, which was filled with golden holy light, to draw the 3 hieroglyphic characters ORZ in the dark air, Jaina understood immediately. An indescribable shyness rushed out from the depths of her soul, igniting every inch of her beautiful body, making every cell excited because of the anticipation of the unknown. Slowly turning her body, Jaina used her graceful body to construct a unique ORZ with the style of Queen Kurtira's. Jaina, blushing, looked back and smiled. She should have been sly, but she pretended to be cute, with an indescribable sense of purity. Teacher Duque, is this right? Is my training posture correct? If it's not, please correct me, teacher. Teacher Duque looked at the perfect curve and swallowed. He helped correct it while saying, here is wrong. Legs need to be separated a little more, and then here needs to be held up a little higher. Don't block the view. And then... don't move. Why are you trembling? Duque asked, knowing the answer. Isn't it because you are interfering with my magic circuit? That won't do. You practice frost magic, so you have to maintain a calm state of mind at all times. Jaina rolled her eyes at Duque and let him do whatever he wanted. Come to think of it, she had waited for 15 years. The most beautiful 15 years of a woman's life were spent in loneliness and waiting. She almost missed the shelf life of her youth. The only good thing was that she could finally give away this treasure before she turned 30. Jaina silently followed her heart, not deliberately or pretentiously. When the magic circuit from Duke finally connected with her magic circuit, she cried and laughed. She let go of all her schemes and did not think about anything else. She enjoyed and endured this storm that she thought would never come. It was a storm that was 13 years late. During the long night, the teacher and disciple did many kinds of magic experiments. For example, the physics of friction heat generation. For example, the magic power flow experiment in the M-shaped pose. It was not until the end of the long night that Jaina finally fell asleep with tears on her face. The first rays of dawn appeared. Duque noticed that Jaina had woken up early in the morning and was staring at him strangely. "What are you thinking about?" Duque smiled, a little curious. Jaina caressed Duque's chest with her jade-like fingers. "I'm wondering how long these days will last." Sigh. Elves were good, they didn't have to worry about aging. Human life is too short. Although she's beautiful because of her short lifespan, when I think about how much of my youth I have left to fight for the favor of those heaven-defying existences who won't age for tens of thousands of years, I feel a little hopeless just thinking about it. A wave of guilt surged in Duque's heart. "Gianna. Promise me you'll keep it a secret." "I swear I won't reveal any secrets about you." As smart as Jaina was, she subconsciously felt that Duque was going to bring out something good, but she didn't know what it was. "Actually, when I saved the Red Dragon Queen Alexstrasza, Her Majesty the Queen gave me a small gift as a thank you." It's the same as the night elves from before, the eternal kind." Duque was very vague. How could someone as smart as Jaina not know? Jaina's expression was very interesting. Before Duque transmigrated, there was never a lack of women who spent half a month's salary or more on cosmetics every month. If she didn't buy enough cosmetics every month, she would eat whatever the dog ate. If she bought too much, she would eat whatever the dog ate. If it was November 11th, she might have to prepare to eat dogs that month. Duke had still underestimated immortality. Eternal youth and whatnot. To a beautiful woman who loved beauty and was about to grow old, it had a great lethality. Next, Jaina told him that she was actually also a fire mage, and her ultimate move was passionate fire. Ignoring her injured body from last night's experiment, Jaina courted death and unlocked almost all the poses. Then, the two of them experimented until late in the morning. Noon, Cervantes looked at Jaina, who hid under the blankets with only two clear and shy eyes, not daring to make a sound. Then, he looked at the embarrassed Duque. "Hey, Duque, you're really something, this." Do you think Jaina would dare to take you away without my permission?" Queen Sylvie sat on the wardrobe, her long legs dangling. "I knew you wouldn't be able to let go of this relationship. I only reluctantly agreed because she was willing to die for you. Duque, I'm not a jealous woman, but you have to know when to stop." I understand." Just as Duque was about to say something, Vanessa knocked on the door. "Master, Her Excellency Tyrant Whisperwind requests an audience." Duque felt a little strange. Because he could become a shadow priest, and to avoid suspicion, he had actually handed over his authority as the commander. After a short discussion, the highest commander of the alliance in Kalimdor was now Turayan. This was also a good example for the older Mograine to make way for Turayan, who was in his prime. If they were to encircle the Burning Legion in Felwood Forest, Tyrande would have looked for Turayan and not him. "Ask her to wait in the conference hall." "No, ask her to come to my wizard tower." After all, the relationship between the Night Elves and the Alliance isn't very stable. Jaina was a little more cautious. "You." Duque couldn't help but look down. "Help me heal." Jaina glared at Duque fiercely. 15 minutes later, Duque, who was dressed formally, arrived at the lower level of the wizard tower with the two queens. He saw Tyrande, who was a little anxious. Welcome to Theramore. How may I help you, Her Excellency Whisperwind? Tyron's exquisite face was filled with deep exhaustion. The destruction of an army of 100,000, the destruction of Mount Hyjal, the elimination of the Burning Legion, the resettlement of the refugees, and the disappearance of the dragon race's blessing due to the destruction of the World Tree. The Night Elves no longer had eternal life and youth. All these things were weighing heavily on her slender shoulders, making it hard for her to breathe. The joy of victory that could still be seen in the higher-ups of the Alliance was almost gone from her face. After all, the Alliance would at most worry about the compensation, but she had to worry about the future of the entire Night Elves. I'm here this time to ask His Excellency Duke Marcus. Tyron's expression suddenly changed halfway through her sentence. Wait, what about your element? Duque smiled bitterly. I'm sorry. The moment I killed Archimonde, I suffered a backlash from the Demon Commander's curse. It took me a lot of effort to change the nature of the dark power he injected into my body, but I'm afraid I can only be a priest for now. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.